No one in that clinic knew the quiet new nurse had once been trained to kill from 1,000 yards away. At San Marcos Clinic, Grace Miller moved through the emergency room like a shadow. She was 34 with dark hair pulled tight, pale gray eyes and hands that never seemed to shake. For 3 months she had worked the early shift, changing bandages, checking charts, and answering questions in a soft, careful voice. Most people barely noticed her. Some called her shy. Some called her cold. Dr. Thomas Reed called her too quiet, as if silence were a weakness. But Grace heard everything. She heard the wheels of stretchers squeak before they turned the corner. She noticed which doors were locked, which exits were blocked, and which patients were lying before they finished their first sentence. When nurses joked in the break room, she smiled politely and kept stirring her coffee. No stories. No family photos. No past. On a gray October morning, rain still clung to the windows as Grace walked in with a small backpack over one shoulder. The hallway smelled of disinfectant and burnt coffee. "Doctor?" Reed glanced up from the nurse's station and gave her the same tired smirk. "Room 3 today, Miller. And try not to ask unnecessary questions." Grace only nodded. She did not defend herself. She did not explain. She just went to work. Because the truth was buried deep. And before noon everyone in that hospital would learn that the quiet nurse they underestimated was not hiding fear. She was hiding a war. Dr. Thomas Reed had spent 22 years inside emergency rooms, and he believed that made him the sharpest person in every hallway he entered. That was his first mistake. He walked through San Marcos Clinic like the building belonged to him. His white coat swung open behind him. His voice carried before his footsteps did. Nurses moved when he spoke. Residents straightened their backs. Patients stopped mid-sentence when he stepped into a room. Dr. Reed liked that. He liked being the man people listened to. And from the first week Grace Miller arrived, he decided she was too quiet to be impressive. "Some nurses have instincts," he once said loudly at the nurse's station, not looking at her but making sure she heard. "Others just follow charts and hope for the best." Grace had been standing 3 feet away, restocking syringes in a metal drawer. Her fingers paused for half a second. Then she kept working. No reaction. No argument. No wounded expression for him to enjoy. That bothered him more than anger would have. To Dr. Reed, silence meant weakness. It meant fear. It meant someone could be pushed into a corner and left there. He did not understand another kind of silence. The kind built in places with no street lights. The kind held by people who had learned that one careless word could get someone killed. Grace knew that kind of silence well, but she wore it gently. That morning room 3 filled fast. A retired mechanic came in with chest pain. A young mother brought a toddler with a fever of 103 degrees. An elderly woman slipped outside the market and split her eyebrow open on the curb. The clinic's old fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Rain tapped against the windows. Somewhere near the ambulance bay, a mop bucket squeaked across the tile. Grace moved from bed to bed with calm precision. She checked the mechanic's pulse before the monitor even finished reading. She noticed the toddler's breathing pattern from the doorway. She saw the elderly woman's right hand curl slightly inward and quietly asked when she had last taken her blood pressure medication. Everything she did was small, clean, exact. And Dr. Reed missed most of it because he was too busy performing. "Move faster, people," he barked, clapping his hands once. "This is an emergency department, not a Sunday picnic." A young nurse named Lily Parker nearly dropped a tray of supplies. Grace caught it before it tipped. No one saw except Lily. "Thank you," Lily whispered. Grace gave her a small nod. "Breathe first. Then move." 5 words. That was all. But Lily steadied. Across the room, Dr. Reed glanced over, annoyed that the moment had passed without him controlling it. By 10 in the morning, the clinic was fully awake. Phones rang. Shoes squeaked. Curtain rings scraped against metal tracks. The smell of antiseptic mixed with old coffee and wet coats from patients coming in out of the rain. Dr. Reed stood over the retired mechanic, Mr. Alan Brooks, and frowned at the chart. "Indigestion," he said. "Probably nothing." Grace was at the sink washing her hands. She did not turn around, but her eyes lifted to the reflection in the small metal cabinet above the counter. Mr. Brooks was sweating too much. His left thumb kept rubbing the seam of his pants. His color was wrong. Not pale from worry. Gray from pressure. Grace dried her hands. "Doctor," she said softly. Dr. Reed sighed before facing her. "Yes, Miller?" His pain moved to the jaw 4 minutes ago. "His rhythm is irregular. I think we should run another EKG now." The room went still in that tiny way rooms do when everyone senses a storm forming. Dr. Reed gave a thin smile. "You think?" Grace held his eyes. "Yes." He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to make it personal but still loud enough for the nurses nearby to hear. "Let me explain something. You are here to assist. Not diagnose. Not interrupt. Not create drama because you read one symptom off a chart. Grace did not blink. Mr. Brooks watched from the bed, frightened but quiet. Lily looked down at the floor. No one challenged Dr. Reed in front of patients. No one. Grace's voice stayed even. He needs another EKG. Dr. Reed's jaw tightened. And I said, it can wait. 3 seconds passed. The monitor beeped. Once. Twice. Then the line shifted. Mr. Brooks grabbed his chest. His face twisted. The room exploded. Lily gasped. Another nurse called for the crash cart. Dr. Reed turned back so fast his coat snapped behind him. Grace was already moving. Not running. Moving. There was a difference. Running belonged to panic. Grace had none. She lowered the bed rail, placed 2 fingers against Mr. Brooks's neck and spoke close to his ear. Mr. Brooks, stay with me. Look at me. Not the ceiling. Me. His eyes locked on hers. Dr. Reed shouted orders loud and scattered. Get cardiology on the line. Where's the EKG? Why is no one moving? But Grace had already attached the leads. 1, 2, 3. Her hands never crossed. Never fumbled. Never wasted emotion. The paper began printing. Dr. Reed snatched it up. His face changed. Just a flicker. But Grace saw it. So did Lily. Heart attack. Not indigestion. Not nothing. For the first time that morning, Dr. Reed had nothing clever to say. Grace looked at him and spoke quietly, giving him room to save face even though he did not deserve it. We caught it early. We, not I. Not you were wrong. We. That was the kind of mercy Dr. Reed did not recognize because he had never practiced it. Within minutes, Mr. Brooks was stabilized and prepared for transfer. The ambulance team rolled him out through the back corridor, oxygen mask over his face, one trembling hand lifted in thanks as he passed Grace. She touched 2 fingers to his shoulder. You're going to be all right. He believed her. Everyone did. Except Dr. Reed. He stood at the nurse's station pretending to review paperwork, but his ears were red. His pride had taken a hit, and men like Thomas Reed did not bleed in public. They made someone else pay for the wound. When Grace walked past him with a stack of clean gauze, he spoke without looking up. Lucky catch. Grace stopped. Only for a beat? Yes, doctor. That was all she said. Lucky. That word hung in the air like smoke. Lily heard it and stared at him. So did Carmen Blake, the head nurse who had been watching from the medication room doorway with narrowed eyes. Carmen had been in hospitals for 20 years. She knew the difference between luck and skill. She knew the difference between a person guessing and a person seeing the whole room before anyone else saw the first clue. And Grace Miller was not guessing. Carmen had noticed things. Grace always stood where she could see the exits. She never let anyone walk too close behind her. When a tray fell, she did not flinch like other people. Her eyes went first to the door, then to the hands of every person nearby, then to the floor. Once during a power flicker, the hallway went dark for less than 2 seconds. Everyone froze. Grace had turned her body toward the stairwell, one hand already reaching for a flashlight she should not have known was taped under the supply counter. Carmen had seen it. She had not asked. Not yet. Because some secrets sat under the skin like old scars. Touched them too soon and people pulled away. By late morning, the storm outside had thickened. The windows shivered under hard rain. A police siren wailed somewhere in the distance, faded, then vanished. Inside, the clinic kept moving, pretending the day was ordinary. Dr. Reed continued his rounds louder than before. That was how he covered embarrassment. He corrected Grace over small things that did not need correcting. Not that bandage. Chart it before you move. Try keeping up. Each time Grace answered the same way. Yes, doctor. No anger. No shame. No surrender either. Just that steady voice. That unshakable calm. It made him look smaller every time he tried to make her feel small. At 1117, a boy came in choking on a coin. His mother screamed so loudly the waiting room fell silent. The child's lips were turning blue. Dr. Reed was down the hall arguing with radiology on the phone. Grace crossed the room in 4 strides. She knelt behind the child, positioned her hands and delivered one controlled thrust. Nothing. The mother sobbed. Grace adjusted half an inch. One more thrust. The coin shot across the tile and spun under a chair. The boy dragged in air with a wet, desperate gasp. The mother collapsed to her knees, clutching him. Grace placed a hand on the boy's back. Good. Breathe. That's it. Dr. Reed arrived 10 seconds later. Too late? He looked at the child. Then at the coin. Then at Grace. For one brief moment, something almost like respect crossed his face. Almost. Then he cleared his throat. Standard response, he said. Any trained nurse could have done that. Grace stood slowly. Rainwater streaked the windows behind her. The lights hummed above. The boy cried into his mother's coat, alive because Grace had moved before permission arrived. She looked at Dr. Reed. Not coldly. Not proudly. Just directly. Yes, she said. Any trained nurse should. The words landed softly. But everyone felt the cut. Dr. Reed's face hardened. He turned away. And that was the second mistake he made that day. Because he thought Grace Miller was embarrassing him. He thought she was a quiet nurse with good hands and bad timing. He thought her calm was obedience. He thought her silence meant there was nothing dangerous behind it. But Grace had survived men far colder than Thomas Reed. She had heard bullets pass close enough to warm the air beside her cheek. She had waited 12 hours in desert heat without moving a muscle. She had made choices in darkness that still followed her into sleep. A doctor's arrogance could not shake her. A cruel comment could not break her. And a crowded emergency room could not hide what was coming. At 1140, the front doors burst open. 3 men stumbled inside carrying a fourth between them. Blood ran down the wounded man's side and dripped onto the clean hospital floor. Not dark like an old cut. Bright, fresh, fast. The clinic froze. Dr. Reed turned. Carmen stepped out of the medication room. Lily dropped the gauze in her hand. Grace looked once at the wound. Then at the men. Then at the door behind them. Her face changed so slightly almost no one noticed. But Carmen did. The quiet nurse was gone. Something else had stepped into her place. And before Dr. Thomas Reed could open his mouth, Grace Miller was already moving toward the blood. At 1140, the front doors of Harborview Medical Center slammed open so hard the metal handles struck the wall. Every head turned. The normal sounds of the emergency room snapped in half. The ringing phones. The rolling carts. The low coughs from the waiting area. Even Dr. Thomas Reed's sharp voice. All of it stopped. 3 men came through the entrance carrying a fourth man between them. They were not dressed like paramedics. They were not dressed like family. They were in plain clothes, dark jackets, boots wet from the rain, faces tight with the kind of fear people try to hide when they are used to danger. The man in the middle was bleeding badly. His left side was soaked through. His shirt clung to his ribs. Blood ran down his belt, down his jeans and dropped onto the polished tile in bright red splashes. One drop. Then another. Then a trail. A woman in the waiting room covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." A child started crying. Grace Miller saw the wound before anyone said a word. Not a kitchen accident. Not a car crash. Not a fall. A gunshot. She knew it in less than a second. Not because she had read about wounds in a nursing textbook. Not because she had watched a training video. Because she had seen men torn open like that before under skies without sirens in places where no hospital lights were coming. Her eyes moved once across the room. Exit door. Clear. Security desk. Empty. Main entrance. Still open. 3 men, 2 carrying, 1 scanning. That last detail mattered. The tallest man, the one with the square jaw and a scar above his right eyebrow, was not looking for help the way ordinary people looked for help. He was measuring distance. Watching corners. Checking hands. Grace saw him. He saw her. For half a second their eyes almost met. Then Grace looked back at the bleeding man. She moved. Not fast enough to draw attention. Not slow enough to waste time. Just exact. She crossed the room in 3 steps, reached the wounded man and pressed both hands firmly against the injury. The man groaned and buckled. "Keep him upright," Grace said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut clean through the panic. The 2 men holding him obeyed before they seemed to realize they had done it. Dr. Reed was still frozen near the nurse's station, one hand on a chart, his mouth half open. Grace did not wait for him. "Lily," she said without turning. "Trauma dressing. Large bore IV. Now?" Lily Parker snapped into motion. Carmen Grace continued. "Clear bay 2. Carmen Blake was already moving. The wounded man coughed and blood flecked his lower lip. Grace leaned closer. "Look at me," she said. "Stay awake." His eyelids fluttered. The man with the scar stared at her harder now. Not suspicious anymore. Startled. As if the way she placed her hands on the wound had opened a door in his memory. Dr. Reed finally jolted forward. "What happened?" he demanded. "Who is he? Why didn't you call an ambulance?" No one answered. The shorter man on the left looked over his shoulder at the front door. Too fast. Too nervous. Grace noticed. So did the scarred man. Dr. Reed rushed in, his voice growing louder to cover the fact that Grace had reached the patient first. "Move aside, Miller," he snapped. "I'll take it from here." Grace did not move immediately. Her hands stayed locked over the wound. The bleeding slowed under her pressure. "Bullet entered the left flank," she said. "Heavy blood loss. He needs surgery." Dr. Reed's face tightened. "I said move." Grace looked at him then. Only for a moment. There was no challenge in her expression. No anger. But there was something harder than both. Calculation. Then she stepped back. Just one step. Enough for Dr. Reed to feel in charge. Not enough for Grace to lose control of the room. He bent over the patient, pressing his stethoscope to the man's chest, barking orders that came half a beat late. Get me vitals. Get me pressure. Call upstairs. We need imaging. Grace stood beside the bed, eyes on the patient's breathing. Too shallow. Too fast. His right hand twitched once against the sheet. A trained observer would have missed it. Grace did not. The wounded man was trying to speak. She leaned in. His lips moved. No sound came out. Dr. Reed turned away, shouting toward the hallway, "Where's that dressing?" Grace lowered her ear closer. The wounded man dragged in one broken breath. Then he whispered one word. Phantom. The word was barely alive. A rasp. A ghost of a name. But Grace heard it. And the man with the scar heard it too. His face changed. The blood. The rain. The panic. The hospital lights buzzing overhead. All of it seemed to pull back from him. He stared at Grace as if the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. Phantom. No one in that emergency room understood the word. To Lily, it sounded like a fever dream. To Carmen, it sounded like a code. To Dr. Reed, it sounded like nothing at all because he was too busy pretending he still owned the moment. But to Grace Miller, it was a hand reaching out of an old grave. She did not flinch. She did not blink. Her shoulders did not rise. But something inside her went very still. 8 years. That name had not touched the air around her in 8 years. She had buried it deeper than fear. Deeper than grief. Deeper than the nightmares that sometimes woke her before dawn with her fingers curled around empty sheets. Phantom was not a nickname. It was a warning. It belonged to a life she had left behind. A life with desert wind in her teeth, radio static in her ear, and targets moving half a mile away through heat waves and dust. A life where mistakes did not mean paperwork. They meant body bags. The scarred man stepped closer. Grace felt him before she saw him move. His boots stopped less than 3 feet away. 8 years, he said under his breath. So low that only she could hear. Grace kept her face on the patient. Hold pressure here, she told Lily, guiding the young nurse's hands into place. Lily swallowed hard. Like this. Exactly. Grace released her hands slowly. The pressure held. Only then did she turn toward the scarred man. His hair was darker than she remembered, with silver now at the temples. His face carried new lines, harder lines. But the eyes were the same. Daniel Cross. Former Special Operations. Former brother-in-arms. Former ghost from a life that was supposed to be dead. He looked like a man staring at someone who had walked out of a funeral. Grace said nothing. Daniel's jaw worked once. We thought you were gone, he whispered. Grace's eyes flicked to Dr. Reed, to Carmen, to the hallway, to the front entrance. Not here, she said. 2 words. Flat, final. Daniel understood. Dr. Reed did not. He spun back toward them, irritated. Do you two know each other? Grace looked at him. No. Daniel looked at Grace. Then he said no. The lie landed between them without a sound. Dr. Reed frowned, but the wounded man groaned again, pulling his attention back. Get him prepped, Reed shouted. Now? The team moved the patient toward Bay 2. Wheels rattled across the floor. Lily hurried beside the bed. Carmen pushed open the curtain. Doctor. Reed followed, still giving orders, still believing volume was the same thing as control. Grace stayed 1 step behind. That was where she preferred to be. Not in front. Not exposed. Close enough to act. The 2 other men followed the stretcher, but Daniel remained near the entrance. His eyes tracked the windows, the hallway, the parking lot beyond the glass. Grace noticed the bulge under his jacket. Weapon. Concealed. Illegal inside a hospital unless a man believed the danger outside was worse than the law inside. The rain intensified against the windows, streaking the glass in silver lines. Outside, a dark SUV rolled slowly past the front entrance. Grace saw it in the reflection of a framed safety poster. Daniel saw her see it. The wounded man was not just a patient. He was bait. Or a message. Or both. Carmen stepped back from Bay 2 for supplies and caught Grace's face. For the first time since Grace had started working at Harborview, Carmen saw what had been hiding behind the quiet. Not fear. Recognition. And that scared her more. Grace, Carmen asked softly. Grace did not answer right away. She looked toward the front doors. The rain kept falling. The SUV disappeared around the corner. Then Grace turned back to Carmen with a calm so sharp it felt unreal. Keep everyone away from the lobby, she said. Carmen's mouth parted. Why? Grace listened. Past the monitors, past the voices, past the wheels and the rain. A faint sound rose outside. Another engine. Then another. Grace's eyes hardened. Because this isn't over. Grace Miller reached Bay 2 before the stretcher stopped moving. The wounded man was fading fast. His boots dragged against the metal frame. His face had gone the color of wet cement. Sweat ran down his temples and disappeared into the collar of his blood-soaked shirt. Every breath came shallow, short, broken, like his body was bargaining for one more second and losing. Dr. Thomas Reed planted himself at the head of the bed. Blood pressure, he snapped. Lily Parker looked at the monitor. Her hands trembled. 80/50. Pulse. 138. Get me suction, get me fluids, call surgery again. Grace stood on the patient's left side watching the wound. Not just the blood. The pattern. The way it pulsed. The way it darkened near the edges. The way his abdomen tightened each time he tried to breathe. She had seen that rhythm before. Not in a hospital. In a ruined stone building outside Kandahar with smoke in the air and sand stuck to the inside of her mouth. A young operator had taken a round through the side and smiled at her like it was nothing. 15 minutes later he was gone. Grace blinked once. The memory vanished. The room came back. Bright lights. White walls. Rain ticking against the window. Dr. Reed barking orders as if noise could stop a man from bleeding out. Grace reached for trauma gauze. Dr. Reed slapped her hand away. I said I have it. The room froze again. Lily looked up. Carmen Blake stood at the curtain, a tray of supplies in her hands, her eyes narrowing. Grace did not react to the slap. She simply lowered her hand. Dr. Reed leaned over the wound and pressed hard. Too hard. The patient arched off the bed with a strangled cry. Grace's eyes snapped to the monitor. Pulse spike. Breathing worse. You're pressing too high, she said. Dr. Reed did not look at her. I know where to apply pressure. Not on this wound. Now he looked. The look was sharp. Public. Warning. This is not the time for your quiet little corrections, Nurse Miller. Grace held his stare. The wounded man gasped. One of the men who had brought him in, the shorter one with rain dripping from his jacket, took half a step forward. Daniel Cross caught him by the arm and stopped him. Daniel's eyes stayed on Grace. He knew that look. He had seen it before in places where the wrong choice meant men did not go home. Grace was measuring the room. Measuring Reed. Measuring blood loss. Measuring time. And she was running out of all of it. The patient's eyelids fluttered. His lips moved again. Not words this time. Air. Only air. Grace stepped in. Move your hand 2 inches lower, she said. Dr. Reed's voice dropped. One more word and you are out of this room. Grace leaned closer to the patient, not the doctor. Sir, can you hear me? The man's eyes opened a slit. Blink once if you can. One slow blink. Grace nodded. Good. Stay with me. Dr. Reed reached for a clamp. Lily suction. Lily fumbled with the tubing. The machine coughed, then failed to catch. Her hands shook harder. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry. Grace turned her head slightly. Lily, look at me. Lily froze. Breathe first. Lily inhaled. Now move. The young nurse fixed the tubing in 2 seconds. Carmen saw it. Daniel saw it. Dr. Reed saw it too and hated that he saw it. The monitor shrieked. Blood pressure dropped. 68/40, Lily said, voice cracking. The wounded man's body went slack. Dr. Reed's face changed. For the first time, true fear broke through his authority. Damn it, he muttered. He's crashing. Grace moved before anyone asked. She stepped around Reed, grabbed a folded hemostatic dressing and placed it directly over the correct point of bleeding. Her left hand locked firm against the wound. Her right hand lifted the man's hip just enough to change the angle of pressure. Not much. Less than an inch. But the bleeding slowed. Immediately. Lily stared. Carmen stopped breathing. Dr. Reed stared at Grace's hands like they had violated the laws of medicine. What are you doing? He snapped. Keeping him alive. The words were quiet. They landed harder than a shout. Dr. Reed reached for her arm. Get out of my way. Grace did not move. He grabbed her sleeve. That was the wrong choice. Not because Grace struck him. She did not. She simply turned her wrist. Small motion. Clean motion. So fast most people missed it. Dr. Reed's grip opened as if his fingers had forgotten their job. His hand dropped to his side. He blinked, stunned, staring at his own palm. Grace never took her pressure off the wound. Doctor, she said, still calm, if you pull me away he dies. Silence. Only the monitor. Only the rain. Only the wounded man trying to breathe. Daniel Cross stepped closer to the curtain. Let her work, he said. Dr. Reed spun toward him. You don't give orders in my emergency room. Daniel's eyes hardened. I know. She does. The sentence cut through the room. Dr. Reed looked back at Grace. For 1 second his pride fought the evidence in front of him. Then the patient convulsed. A deep violent spasm tore through his body. His right hand clawed at the sheet. Blood pushed against Grace's dressing. Grace leaned in, using her body weight to hold pressure. Lily hang O negative. Wide open. Lily hesitated. Dr. Reed was still the doctor. Grace was still only a nurse. That was how the badge read. But badges did not stop bleeding. Now, Grace said. Lily moved. Carmen crossed the room and helped her. Dr. Reed's mouth tightened, but he did not stop them. Grace looked at Carmen. Get a second line in his right arm. Not the left. He's losing perfusion on that side. Carmen did not ask how she knew. She just did it. The patient's eyes rolled back. Grace tapped his cheek once. Stay awake. No response. Again. Firmer. Stay awake. His eyes opened. Barely. There you are, Grace said. Her voice softened for him and only him. You're not leaving this room yet? The wounded man's fingers twitched. Daniel looked away for a moment, jaw tight. He had seen Grace do that before too. Talk to men at the edge. Pull them back with nothing but tone, pressure and refusal. Dr. Reed stood useless for 3 seconds. 3 full seconds. For a man like him, it was an eternity. Then Grace gave him a job. Doctor, call surgery and tell them he has internal bleeding, likely vascular involvement. He needs an operating room ready now, not in 10 minutes. His eyes flashed. She had commanded him in his own room. In front of his staff. In front of strangers. But the monitor was still screaming and the floor beneath the bed was red. Dr. Reed swallowed his pride like broken glass. He grabbed the phone. Surgery, he barked. This is Reed. I need an OR prepped immediately. Grace kept working. Her hands moved with a rhythm no nursing school could teach. Pressure. Check airway. Watch pupils. Read pulse. Shift dressing. Listen. Adjust. She did not waste emotion. Every action had a reason. Every second had a place. Carmen watched her and felt the hair rise on her arms. This was not hospital training. This was battlefield training. This was the kind of skill born where help was too far away and hesitation became a death sentence. The shorter man near the curtain whispered, "Who is she?" Daniel did not answer. His face said he already knew. Or feared he did. The wounded man's blood pressure lifted. 78/46, Lily said. Grace nodded. Again. A few seconds later, Lily read it out. 82/50. The room seemed to exhale. Not safe. Not yet. But no longer falling off the cliff. Grace reached for fresh gauze. This time Dr. Reed handed it to her. The room noticed. He noticed that the room noticed. His face burned but his hand stayed steady. Grace took the gauze without comment. No victory. No smirk. No punishment. Just work. That made it worse for him somehow. Because she could have humiliated him. She did not. She could have said, "I told you." She did not. She simply saved the man he had nearly lost. A surgical team finally arrived, pushing through the curtain with a transport bed. Voices filled the bay, orders came faster. Hands reached in, tubes were checked. Lines secured. Grace did not release pressure until the surgeon placed his own hands exactly where hers had been. He glanced at the wound. Then at her. "You packed this?" Grace nodded. The surgeon looked once at Dr. Reed, then back at Grace. "Good work." 2 words. Simple. Deadly. Dr. Reed's jaw clenched. They rolled the wounded man out toward the surgical wing. Daniel stepped aside as the bed passed his eyes, following the man until the doors swung shut. Then the emergency room fell into a strange quiet. Not peaceful. Loaded. The floor was streaked with blood. Lily's gloves were red. Carmen held a used IV wrapper in one hand and did not seem to realize it. Dr. Reed stood near the counter, his authority cracked in a way everyone could see but no one dared mention. Grace removed her gloves. Slowly. Carefully. She dropped them into the biohazard bin. Then she washed her hands. The water ran pink at first. Then clear. No one spoke. Dr. Reed finally broke the silence. "Where did you learn to handle a gunshot wound like that?" Grace turned off the faucet. The room waited. Carmen watched her reflection in the mirror. Lily stared at the floor. Daniel Cross stood by the curtain still as stone. Grace reached for a paper towel and dried each finger one by one. Then she looked at Dr. Reed. In a place where waiting for permission got people killed. No one breathed. Outside thunder rolled low over the city. Dr. Reed opened his mouth but nothing came out. For once his voice failed him. Grace walked past him toward the hall. Calm, silent, unshaken. But Daniel saw the truth in her shoulders. The past had found her. And the blood on the floor was only the beginning. The word did not sound like much. One broken breath. One name scraped out through blood and pain. One ghost pulled into the open. Phantom. The wounded man had whispered it once in Bay 2 before the surgical team took him away. Barely anyone heard it. Lily thought it was the sound of a man fighting shock. Dr. Reed dismissed it as nonsense. Carmen Blake heard enough to know it meant something but not enough to know why. Daniel Cross heard it clearly. Grace Miller heard it deeper than that. She heard it in her bones. The hallway outside surgery smelled like disinfectant, wet rubber, and old coffee. The rain pressed against the windows in silver sheets. Down the corridor, a monitor, somewhere a child coughed. A nurse laughed nervously at the front desk, trying to drag the world back to normal. But normal had already left. Grace stood beside the supply alcove, drying her hands though they were already dry. She folded the paper towel once. Then twice. Then she dropped it into the trash. Daniel watched her from 10 feet away. He did not rush her. He knew better. 8 years ago, men had learned the hard way that rushing Grace Miller was like stepping into tall grass without checking for snakes. Carmen appeared at the end of the hall, carrying a clipboard she did not need. She slowed when she saw the two of them. Daniel's posture was wrong for a worried friend. Too still, too alert. His eyes moved from doorway to doorway, then to the reflection in the dark window glass. Grace did the same thing. That was when Carmen knew. They were not strangers. They were not even old friends. They were survivors of the same fire. Dr. Reed came storming from Bay 2, face tight sleeves, rolled pride, still bleeding worse than the patient had. Miller, he called. Grace turned. He pointed toward the trauma bay. I asked you a question. She said nothing. Where did you learn that technique? Grace's voice stayed flat. I answered you. No, Reed said. You gave me a line. Daniel's eyes shifted toward him. Grace lifted one hand slightly. Not now. Daniel stopped. Dr. Reed did not see the signal. Carmen did. It was tiny. Almost nothing. But Daniel obeyed it instantly. That frightened Carmen more than any shouting could have. Reed stepped closer. This is a hospital, not some private stage for you to play hero. A man came in with a gunshot wound and you handled him like you had done it 100 times. Grace held his gaze. More than that, Daniel said quietly. The hallway went cold. Reed turned on him. Who are you? Daniel did not answer the question. He looked at Grace instead. You heard what he said. Grace's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Carmen's fingers curled around the clipboard. What did he say? She asked. No one answered. The surgical doors swung open at the end of the corridor. A nurse in blue scrubs stepped out, moving fast. Patient is in OR 3. They're opening him now? Grace nodded once. Is he stable enough? For the moment? For the moment was hospital language for maybe. The nurse disappeared again. Silence settled. Daniel took one slow step toward Grace. He said, Phantom, he said. Dr. Reed frowned. What is that supposed to mean? Grace's eyes never left Daniel's. Nothing. Daniel's face hardened. Don't do that. Not here. Then where? He asked, voice low. Because if he remembered that name, somebody else did too. The words landed like a match in gasoline. Carmen looked between them. Grace. For the first time since Carmen had known her, Grace looked tired. Not weak. Not afraid. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with long shifts or skipped meals. Tired like someone who had buried a life with both hands and just heard knocking from inside the grave. Dr. Reed threw up one hand. Enough. I do not have time for spy games in my ER. Daniel's eyes snapped to him. Then stop talking. Reed stiffened. Excuse me. Daniel moved closer and the hallway seemed to shrink around him. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. You nearly got that man killed because you were too proud to listen. So stand there, be quiet, and let the person who knows what is happening think. Reed's face flushed red. Carmen expected him to explode. He didn't. Something in Daniel's voice told him this was not a man who made empty threats. Grace looked toward the waiting room. A mother rocked a sleeping baby. An old man read a folded newspaper. A teenager scrolled on his phone. A security guard stood near the front desk board, one hand resting on his belt. Too many civilians. Too many open angles. Too many glass doors. Grace looked back at Daniel. Who was he traveling with? 2 for my team? 1 driver outside. Not official. Daniel shook his head. No. Who shot him? Daniel's mouth pressed into a hard line. That's what he was coming to tell you. Grace went still. Carmen heard herself breathe. Daniel continued each word, careful. His name is Evan Mercer. He was communications support on the last operation. Grace's eyes sharpened. He died in Belarus, she said. That's what the report said. And now he's bleeding in my hospital. Daniel nodded. Dr. Reed stared at them. Belarus operations, what the hell is this? Grace ignored him. The old name circled the hallway again. Phantom. It had been hers. Not officially. Official records had another name. Lieutenant Grace Miller. Navy nurse before special assignment. Field medic on paper. Logistic support when people asked questions they were not cleared to ask. But in the places where her real work happened, names got shorter, cleaner, colder. She had been Phantom because no one saw her until it was already over. The radio would crackle. Phantom in position. Then silence. A mile away a target would step into a window. One breath. One squeeze. A body would fall before the sound arrived. She had been 26 when they gave her that name, 29 when she started hating it, 30 when she disappeared. And now a dying man had dragged it into a hospital full of children, nurses, and unlocked doors. Grace turned to Carmen. "Do you trust me?" The question was so sudden Carmen forgot how to answer. She looked at Grace's face. Not the shy nurse. Not the quiet woman who drank black coffee alone in the break room. This was someone else. Someone carved down to the nerve. "Yes," Carmen said. Grace nodded. "Then listen carefully." Dr. Reed stepped in. "Carmen, do not take orders from." Carmen cut him off without looking at him. "Be quiet, Thomas." His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Grace spoke fast now but still soft. "Move non-critical patients away from the front lobby. Use the east corridor. Tell security there may be a gas leak near admissions." Carmen's eyes widened. "Gas leak? It will clear the waiting room without panic." Daniel gave the smallest nod. Grace continued. "Lock the rear medication door. Keep Lily with you. No one goes near Bay 2. No one speaks to police until I know who is outside." Dr. Reed found his voice again. "You are insane." Grace turned to him. And for the first time Dr. Thomas Reed saw what had been hidden behind her silence. Not anger. Not panic. "Command." "Doctor," she said, "in the next few minutes, people may come through those doors pretending to be police, federal agents, or family. They will sound official. They will look calm. They may even know your name." Reed swallowed. Grace stepped closer. "If you let them in, people will die." The words were plain. That made them worse. Carmen's face drained of color, but she did not hesitate. She turned and moved toward the nurse's station, already calling out instructions in a steady voice. "Lily with me. We're relocating waiting room patients. Possible gas leak near admissions. East corridor now?" Lily looked confused, but she moved. Carmen had that effect. Grace watched the first patient stand. The mother lifted her baby. The old man folded his newspaper. The teenager complained until Lily touched his shoulder and told him to move. "Good. Quiet. Controlled." Daniel came beside Grace. "Same old Phantom," he murmured. Grace did not look at him. "That name is dead." Daniel's voice lowered. "Not to whoever shot Mercer." Outside, through the rain-streaked glass, headlights turned into the parking lot. Not one car. Two. Black SUVs. No sirens. No rush. No mistake. Grace's shoulders settled. The way they had in another life, behind a rifle before the world narrowed to breath and distance. Dr. Reed saw it. Carmen saw it from the nurse's station. Daniel saw it and looked almost relieved. Grace Miller, the quiet nurse everyone had underestimated, took one step toward the front of the clinic. No one asked her to. No one thanked her. She just did it. Because the past had arrived at Harborview Medical Center. And this time it had come armed. Daniel Cross had seen Grace Miller die once. Not the body. The name. The woman. The soldier everyone knew as Phantom had vanished 8 years ago after a mission no one was allowed to discuss and no one had ever truly survived. And now she was standing under the fluorescent lights of Harborview Medical Center, wearing blue scrubs, a nurse badge, and the same dead calm eyes Daniel remembered from places where the air smelled like gun oil and sand. For a moment he could not speak. The rain hit the front windows harder. The two black SUVs sat outside the clinic entrance with their headlights on white beams cutting through the gray afternoon. No one got out yet. That made it worse. Men in a hurry rushed. Men in control waited. Grace stood 10 feet from the lobby doors, watching the reflection in the glass instead of the vehicles themselves. Daniel knew why. Reflections showed more. Reflections caught movement before eyes did. Dr. Thomas Reed stood behind her, pale, now his arrogance bleeding into confusion. "What are we dealing with?" he asked, his voice lower than before. Grace did not turn. "People who don't miss twice." Daniel almost smiled. Not because anything was funny. Because that was her. Still sharp. Still brutal. Still cutting straight through fear to the facts. Carmen Blake moved patients through the east corridor with Lily Parker beside her. She kept her voice calm, even gentle. "Possible gas leak, folks. We're just moving everyone to the other side of the building. Nice and easy." The old man with the newspaper shuffled past. The young mother held her baby tight. A teenager rolled his eyes but followed. None of them knew the truth. That was the point. Grace waited until the waiting room was almost clear. Then she spoke without looking at Daniel. "You said Mercer came to tell me something." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Yes." "What?" "He found the file." Grace's eyes shifted just barely. "Which file?" "The real one." Those 3 words hung between them. The real one. 8 years disappeared. The clinic walls fell away. For Daniel, it was no longer Harborview. It was a midnight extraction zone outside a burned-out village. Radio static. Broken coordinates. 5 operators pinned down by fire that should never have been there. Grace on overwatch. Daniel carrying a wounded man through mud. Mercer screaming into the comms that the evacuation route had been compromised. Then silence. Then the explosion. Officially, it had been bad intelligence. Officially, the unit had walked into an ambush because the target moved earlier than expected. Officially, Lieutenant Grace Miller was declared missing, presumed dead. Daniel had stood at the memorial service 3 months later, staring at a folded flag that did not belong to a body. He had watched names engraved into polished stone. He had listened to officers use words like sacrifice, honor, and unfortunate failure of field intelligence. He had believed none of it. But he had believed Grace was gone. Now she was 3 feet away from him, alive, and somehow that hurt more than the funeral had. "You should have told me," he said. Grace finally looked at him. There was no apology in her face. Only wait. "If I told you, you would have come looking." "I did come looking." "You would have found me." Daniel's eyes burned. "That was the idea." Grace looked away first. "Not from guilt? From memory." "I couldn't risk it." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Do you know what we thought? Do you know what I thought?" "I know." "No," Daniel said. "You don't." For the first time, the calm around Grace cracked. Just a hairline. But Daniel saw it. So did Carmen, watching from the far hall. Daniel's voice dropped even further. "We searched for you for 9 months. I burned favors. I broke rules. I followed rumors across 3 countries. Every time someone said they'd seen a woman with gray eyes, I went. Every time a body turned up without papers, I made them show me the face." Grace's throat moved. But she said nothing. Daniel's hand curled into a fist at his side. "Then command told me to stop. Said you were dead. Said I was grieving. Said Phantom had been compromised and lost." The word hit her. Phantom. Her old name. Her buried name. Grace looked back at the SUVs outside. Maybe they were right. Daniel shook his head. "No, you weren't lost. You left. That one landed." Dr. Reed stood behind them, silent now, listening to a story he did not understand but finally knew better than to interrupt. Grace's voice was barely above a whisper. "I had proof." Daniel froze. The lobby doors reflected 2 dark shapes inside the first SUV. "Still waiting. Still watching." Grace continued. "Not enough to expose them. Enough to know the ambush wasn't a mistake." Daniel's face changed. He had suspected it for years. Suspicion was one thing. Hearing it from her was another. "Who?" he asked. Grace's eyes stayed on the glass. "People above us." "How high?" "High enough that anyone I contacted would be watched. High enough that if I came home, everyone still alive from the team would become leverage." Daniel looked down for half a second. When he looked back up, the anger was gone. In its place was something worse. Understanding. "You disappeared to protect us." Grace did not answer. She did not need to. No one asked her to. No one thanked her. She just did it. 8 years of silence. 8 years of being called shy by nurses, cold by doctors, forgettable by strangers. 8 years of sleeping lightly, moving carefully, never giving anyone enough truth to become a target. Daniel swallowed hard. "You let us bury you." Grace's face tightened. "Better buried than hunted." Outside, the passenger door of the first SUV opened. Slowly. Daniel shifted his stance. Grace saw it in the reflection. "Don't reach," she said. "I'm armed." "I know. You always know." Usually. Despite everything, Daniel almost laughed under his breath. The door opened wider. A man stepped out holding a black umbrella. Not a gun. Not yet. He wore a dark suit, clean shoes, and the relaxed posture of someone who had never had to raise his own voice because other people did violence for him. Grace's eyes narrowed. Daniel noticed. "You know him?" "Yes." "Name?" "Caleb Voss." Daniel's expression hardened. He knew the name too. Former intelligence liaison. Officially retired. Unofficially involved in operations that never appeared on paper. The kind of man who smiled before ordering a room erased. Caleb Voss stood in the rain, umbrella, tilted, looking through the glass doors straight at Grace. Not searching. Recognizing. After 8 years, the dead woman had been found. Carmen reached them from the hallway, breath controlled but face pale. "Patients are moved," she said. "Most of the lobby is clear. Lily is locking the rear medication door." Grace nodded. Good. Carmen looked at Daniel. Then Grace. Then the man outside. Is he police? No, Grace said. Federal. Daniel answered this time. Worse. Carmen absorbed that. She did not panic. Grace respected her for it. Dr. Reed finally spoke, voice thin. We should call 911. Grace glanced at him. You can. But if Voss is here, he already knows local response time, police routes, and how long he has before anyone useful arrives. Carmen whispered. What does he want? Grace looked at the surgical wing. Merzer. Daniel added. And whatever he came to give her. Carmen's face tightened. The wounded man. Grace nodded. And if they can't get him? Carmen asked. Grace's eyes returned to Voss. Then they'll take me. The words dropped cold into the hall. For a second no one moved. Then Daniel stepped in front of her. Grace's voice sharpened. Don't. He did not move back. I lost you once. This isn't about you. It is now? Grace looked at him, and for the first time Daniel saw something beneath the control. Not fear for herself. Fear for him. For Carmen. For Lily. For every innocent person still breathing inside that building. That had always been her curse. She could pull a trigger from 1,000 yards. But she could not stop caring about the people near her. Caleb Voss lifted one hand and knocked on the glass door. 3 slow taps. The sound was soft. Polita. Terrifying. Tap, tap, tap. Grace walked toward the entrance. Daniel caught her arm. She looked down at his hand. He released it immediately. Old instinct. Old respect. Grace, he said. She paused. He had not said Phantom. Not Miller. Grace. For one brief second the hospital disappeared again, and they were younger, bleeding, half-starved, still believing loyalty could outrun power. Daniel's voice broke around the edges. I knew it was you the second Mercer said the name. Grace looked at him. How? He gave a sad smile. Because nobody else ever went that still before a fight. Outside, Voss smiled through the rain-streaked glass. Grace turned back to the door. Her shoulders settled. The quiet nurse was gone now. The woman everyone thought had disappeared 8 years ago had returned. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just one step at a time. And every step made Daniel Cross understand the same truth that had just begun to dawn on Carmen, Lily, and even Dr. Reed. Grace Miller had not survived by accident. She had survived because the most dangerous people in the world had failed to kill her. And now they had come to try again. Carmen Blake had spent 20 years inside emergency rooms, and she had learned one rule the hard way. People revealed themselves under pressure. Not in meetings, not in staff reviews. Not when the coffee was fresh and everyone had slept. Under pressure. When a monitor screamed. When blood hit the floor. When a family member begged for a miracle, and there was no miracle left in the room. That was when people showed who they really were. And Grace Miller had just shown Carmen something she could not ignore. She was not just a quiet nurse. She was not shy. She was not cold. She was not fragile. She was trained. Carmen stood at the mouth of the east corridor, watching Grace face the rain-streaked glass doors of Harborview Medical Center. Outside, Caleb Voss waited beneath a black umbrella, smiling like a man arriving for lunch instead of a man bringing danger to a hospital. 3 soft knocks still seemed to echo in the lobby. Tap, tap, tap. The waiting room was nearly empty now. Chairs sat crooked. A magazine lay open on the floor. A half-empty paper cup of coffee cooled on the small table near the vending machines. Only minutes ago this had been an ordinary clinic lobby filled with coughs, restless feet, and tired people waiting for their names to be called. Now it felt like the front line of something Carmen did not understand. Daniel Cross stood beside Grace, shoulders squared, eyes locked on the doors. Dr. Thomas Reed hovered a few steps behind them, pale and furious, looking like a man who had lost control of his own kingdom and could not decide whether to demand it back or run from it. Carmen looked at Grace. Really looked. The way Grace stood was all wrong for a nurse and exactly right for someone expecting violence. Weight balanced, hands loose, chin lowered slightly. Eyes reading the reflections, not just the obvious threat. Carmen had noticed pieces of it before. Small things. Grace never sat with her back to a doorway in the break room. If all the chairs faced the wrong way, she stood. When the hospital generator failed during a thunderstorm 2 months earlier, everyone had frozen in the dark. Grace had reached under the supply counter and pulled out a flashlight no one else remembered was there. When a drunk patient threw a metal tray across Bay 4, Grace had not flinched. She had watched his shoulders before the throw moved Lily out of the path before the tray left his hand, and then spoke to the man so calmly he sat down and cried. At the time, Carmen had called it instinct. Now she knew better. Instinct was natural. Grace was practiced. Every movement had been sharpened somewhere far away from this hospital. Carmen walked toward her slower than usual. Grace, she said. Grace did not turn from the doors. Stay behind the wall. Carmen stopped. Not because she was offended. Because the command made sense. From where she stood, the wall cut the line of sight from outside. If someone fired through the glass, Carmen would not be the first thing they hit. That realization sent a chill through her chest. "Is that why you told me to clear the lobby?" Carmen asked. Grace's eyes moved once, checking the reflection of the side hall. "Yes." Carmen swallowed. "You knew they might shoot through the doors." "I knew they might do worse." Dr. Reed let out a strained laugh. "This is ridiculous. No one is going to open fire in a medical center in broad daylight." Daniel did not even look at him. Grace did. "Doctor," she said softly, "the man outside helped bury an entire mission under a false report. Broad daylight will not bother him." Reed's mouth closed. Carmen felt the sentence hit her stomach. A mission. A false report. A man in surgery who was supposed to be dead. And Grace Miller, a woman who had spent 3 months quietly changing IV bags and wiping blood from gurney rails, standing at the center of it all. Carmen's mind tried to make the pieces fit. They did not. So she did what good nurses did when chaos got too big. She focused on the next task. "What do you need?" she asked. Grace finally looked at her. For 1 second, Carmen saw surprise. Not much. Just a flicker. Maybe Grace expected fear. Maybe she expected questions. Maybe she expected Carmen to step back like everyone else had once the truth began showing through the cracks. But Carmen did not step back. She had patience in this building. Staff. A young nurse named Lily who still shook when someone raised their voice. A surgeon upstairs cutting into a man who had carried a secret through a bullet wound. Carmen was afraid. Of course she was. But fear was not an excuse to become useless. Grace seemed to understand that. "Get everyone out of the west hallway," Grace said. Quietly. "No announcements over the speaker." Carmen nodded. "Lock the double doors near radiology." "Already done." Grace's eyes sharpened, approving without softening. "Good." The word warmed Carmen more than it should have. She hated that. Grace continued. "Keep Lily away from the front desk. She's brave, but she freezes when people yell." Carmen almost smiled. "Even now." "I know. Dr. Reed should stay in the trauma bay." Reed bristled. "Excuse me." Grace did not blink. "You are no help here." The words were not cruel. That made them harder to argue with. Reed's face tightened. "I am the attending physician in this emergency department. And if this becomes medical, I'll call you." Daniel's mouth twitched once. Carmen saw it. Reed did too. His pride flared, but before he could answer, Caleb Voss knocked again. Tap. Tap. This time only twice. Then his voice came through the glass, smooth and clear. "Lieutenant Miller? We should talk before someone makes this unpleasant." Carmen felt the air leave the room. "Lieutenant." Not nurse. Not Grace. "Lieutenant." Grace's face stayed still. But Carmen saw the tiny shift in her eyes. A door opening somewhere deep. Daniel stepped half an inch forward. Grace said no. He stopped. Again. That silent obedience told Carmen more than any confession could have. Daniel Cross was not a timid man. Everything about him said command, discipline, danger. But when Grace spoke, he listened. Instantly. Who had she been to make a man like him stop with one word? Carmen looked at her hands. They were still holding the clipboard. Her knuckles were white. She set it down on the nurse's station. No more pretending this was normal. She moved back toward Lily, who was standing near the east corridor with a stack of patient charts clutched to her chest. "What's happening?" Lily whispered. Carmen kept her voice low. "We're keeping people safe." "Is Grace in trouble?" Carmen looked back across the lobby. Grace stood in front of the glass doors like a thin blue line between danger and everyone else. "Yes," Carmen said. "But I think trouble is in trouble too." Lily did not understand. Carmen barely did. But she meant it. Outside, Voss tilted his umbrella slightly and smiled wider. "I know you have Mercer inside," he called. "I know he spoke to you. I know Cross is there with you. This can be handled professionally." Daniel muttered, "Professional. That's rich." Grace's voice stayed quiet. "He wants us talking." "Why?" Carmen asked from behind the wall. "To count voices," Grace said. "To place bodies." Carmen's skin prickled. Grace had heard more than words. She had heard the purpose behind them. She had read the trap while everyone else was still listening to the sentence. Carmen remembered something from Grace's first week. A man had come in after a workplace accident, half his palm cut open by a blade. The room had been loud. His wife had cried. Dr. Reed had complained about paperwork. Grace had stepped in, wrapped the hand, and noticed the man kept staring at the exit. Afterward, she told Carmen, "He's scared of whoever brought him." Carmen had checked. Grace was right. The injury had not been an accident. It had been violence. The man was too afraid to say so. Grace had seen it in the eyes. Carmen had dismissed that as unusually good observation. Now she realized Grace had been scanning for threats from the first day she walked in. Not because she was paranoid. Because she had survived enough to know threats rarely announce themselves honestly. Carmen turned to Lily. Take Mrs. Alvarez and the baby into the staff break room. Lock the door. No matter what you hear, you stay there. Lily nodded, frightened but steady. Good girl, Carmen said. Then Carmen walked back toward Grace. Grace glanced at her. I told you to stay behind the wall. I heard you. And I've been head nurse in this place for 11 years. I know every door, every bad lock, every supply closet, and every shortcut through this building. If those men come in, you need me. Daniel looked at Grace. Carmen saw the question in his eyes. Can we trust her? Grace looked at Carmen for a long moment. Carmen did not look away. She had been underestimated too many times in her life to miss what was happening. Grace had spent months making herself small. Not because she was weak. Because she was hiding something big enough to get people killed. Carmen understood hiding. Not like Grace did. Not with bullets and classified files. But she understood the kind of woman who carried more than she said. Finally, Grace nodded. One time. North stairwell, Grace said. Can it be accessed from outside? Carmen answered immediately. Only with a badge, but the latch sticks. A hard pull opens it. Daniel cursed under his breath. Grace's eyes flicked to the hallway. That's where they'll try first. Carmen felt a strange pulse of pride and fear. She had given her a useful answer. She was part of this now. Outside, one of the SUV doors opened behind Voss. A second man stepped out. Then a third. Dark suits. Empty hands. Calm faces. Too calm. Grace's shoulders lowered. Daniel reached under his jacket. This time Grace did not stop him. Carmen's heart slammed once against her ribs. Dr. Reed backed up a step. Voss pressed one palm to the glass. Last chance, Grace. There it was. Not Lieutenant. Not Miller. Grace. Like he owned the name. Grace stepped closer to the door, but not close enough to be grabbed if the glass broke. Carmen noticed that too. Every inch mattered. Grace spoke loudly enough for Voss to hear. You should have stayed gone. Voss smiled. So should you? For 1 second no one moved. Then Grace turned her head slightly toward Carmen. Lights. Carmen understood instantly. The lobby light panel was behind the nurse's station. She moved fast. Not running. Moving. Just like Grace had taught the room without ever teaching it. Her fingers found the switches. 1, 2, 3. The lobby dropped into sudden shadow. Patients gasped behind closed doors. Outside, the men lost their reflections in the glass. Inside, Grace Miller disappeared from where she had been standing. Carmen froze by the switches, breath caught in her throat. One blink earlier, Grace had been in the lobby. Now she was gone. Daniel smiled grimly in the dark. Carmen finally understood why a dying man had called her Phantom. Not because she was invisible. Because by the time you realized she had moved, it was already too late. The lobby went dark so fast that Dr. Thomas Reed cursed out loud. 1 second, Harborview Medical Center was washed in fluorescent white. The next, only gray daylight leaked through the rain-streaked glass doors broken by the hard beams of the SUVs outside. Shadows swallowed the waiting room. Chairs became shapes. Doorways became black cuts in the wall. The polished floor reflected headlights like thin strips of ice. And Grace Miller was gone. Carmen Blake stood by the light switches with her hands still on the panel, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. She had turned off lights during power drills before. She had dimmed exam rooms for patients with migraines. She had shut down whole wings during overnight cleaning. But this was different. This darkness had teeth. Outside, Caleb Voss stopped smiling. For the first time since he stepped out beneath that black umbrella, something moved across his face. Not fear. Irritation. Men like him hated losing control of a room. Daniel Cross faded back toward the wall near the admissions desk, one hand under his jacket. He was visible for only a second, then the shadows took him too. Dr. Reed backed into the trauma bay doorway. What the hell is happening? He whispered. Carmen did not answer. Because she knew now. 4 men had come to the hospital looking for Grace. Not patients. Not police. Not family. Hunters. Voss raised his hand outside and made a small motion. The other 3 men spread out without a word. That was when Carmen's stomach dropped. They had done this before. One man remained with Voss at the front entrance. Tall, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, with a flat expression that did not change even in the rain. The second moved left toward the ambulance bay. The third moved right, disappearing around the side of the building. And the fourth stayed near the rear SUV, one hand inside his coat, watching the parking lot. They were covering exits. Carmen knew every inch of Harborview. She knew where the old pipes knocked in winter. She knew which supply closet smelled like bleach no matter how often they aired it out. She knew which doors locked cleanly and which ones needed a shoulder. Grace had asked about the north stairwell. The latch stuck. A hard pull opened it. Carmen turned sharply. North stairwell. She moved before she thought. Not running? Moving. Just like Grace. Her shoes made soft taps against the tile as she slipped behind the nurse's station and down the side hall. The emergency lights glowed red above the doors, bathing everything in the color of blood. Somewhere behind her, a patient coughed behind a closed exam room. Lily Parker whispered to Mrs. Alvarez and the baby, trying to keep them calm. Carmen reached the corner and froze. A sound came from the north stairwell. Metal. Soft. Careful. Not a crash. Not a shove. A practiced pull. Someone testing the bad latch. Carmen's fingers tightened around nothing. She had left the clipboard behind. No weapon. No phone in her hand. Nothing but her badge and 20 years of knowing this building better than anyone. The stairwell door moved. Once. Twice. Then it opened half an inch. Carmen stopped breathing. A black-gloved hand slipped through the gap. Before the door could open wider, something dropped from above. Not something. Grace. She came down from the overhead maintenance ledge like a shadow falling loose from the ceiling. No sound. No warning. No wasted motion. Her left hand caught the intruder's wrist. Her right hand pressed into the inside of his elbow. She turned his arm in a way that looked almost gentle. The man's body locked. His knees hit the floor. Grace caught the back of his collar before he could make a sound and drove him sideways into the wall, pinning him behind the door where no one in the hall could see. Carmen's hand flew to her mouth. The man was twice Grace's size. It did not matter. He tried to reach under his coat. Grace already had his hand. She stripped a compact pistol from his grip, dropped the magazine, cleared the chamber and slid the weapon under a rolling linen cart with one smooth push of her foot. Then she leaned close to his ear. Sleep. One sharp pressure point beneath the jaw. The man sagged. Not dead. Out. Grace lowered him silently to the floor. Carmen stared. Grace looked up. Their eyes met in the red emergency light. Grace put one finger to her lips. Carmen nodded. Her body wanted to shake. She refused to let it. Grace pointed to the stairwell door. Then to Carmen. Then made a locking motion. Carmen understood. She stepped over the unconscious man, closed the stairwell door and used her badge to lock it. The latch clicked but not firmly. Grace noticed. Of course she did. She dragged the linen cart in front of it and wedged the wheels sideways. Hold it closed, Carmen whispered. Slow them down. Grace whispered back. Them. Plural. Carmen felt that word crawl up her spine. From the front lobby came a sharp crack. Not a gunshot. Glass. Someone had struck the front door with something hard. Then Caleb Voss's voice floated through the building. Grace. You are making this difficult. Grace did not move. Carmen expected anger. She saw none. Only focus. Grace touched the unconscious man's jacket, searching quickly. She found a small earpiece, a folding knife and a black phone with no case. She held the phone up for half a second, then slipped it into her scrub pocket. Carmen stared at the man's sleeve. There was no police patch. No federal badge. No hospital ID. Just a dark suit. A dark suit in a children's clinic hallway carrying a loaded weapon. Carmen whispered. What do they want from you? Grace's eyes flicked toward the surgical wing. Documents. What documents? The kind people kill entire teams to bury. Carmen swallowed. The words sounded impossible. But the man at her feet made them real. Another crack came from the lobby. This time louder. Daniel's voice cut through the dark from somewhere near the front desk. Voss, you break that glass and every camera in this building catches your face. Voss answered calmly. Then turn the cameras off. Carmen's blood ran cold. He was not guessing. He knew the building. He knew the systems. He knew there were cameras. Grace's face hardened. He has someone inside the network. How? Carmen asked. Doesn't matter. That was Grace's way. Carmen was learning it now. No panic over the size of the problem. Only the next useful action. Grace handed Carmen the dead phone. Take this to Lily. Tell her to keep it off. Do not let it connect to anything. Hide it under the medication fridge. Carmen took it. Why? If it has a tracker, the fridge blocks some signal. If it has a kill switch, I want it away from patients. Carmen nodded, then stopped. Grace. Grace looked at her. You can't fight 4 armed men alone. Grace's expression did not change. I'm not alone. For a second Carmen thought she meant Daniel. Then Grace looked at her. Carmen felt the weight of it. She was afraid. More afraid than she had been in years. But something steady rose under that fear. A hard little flame. All right, Carmen said. Grace nodded once. No speech. No thank you. No hero moment. Just trust. From the lobby came a third crack. This time the glass wept. A woman screamed behind a closed room. Lily shouted softly. "It's okay, stay down." Grace moved toward the front hall, but Carmen caught her sleeve. Grace stopped instantly. Not defensive. Not startled. Listening. Carmen whispered. "There's a service hall behind radiology. It comes out near the lobby vending machines. If one of them went around right, he may try that door." Grace's eyes sharpened. "Show me." Carmen led her through the dim corridor past locked exam rooms and darkened monitors. They moved fast, low, quiet. Carmen had never thought of herself as stealthy. She was a head nurse with bad knees and reading glasses hanging from a chain. But beside Grace, she found herself placing her feet more carefully. Heel. 2. Pause. Listen. At the radiology corner, Grace touched Carmen's shoulder and gently pushed her behind a wall. Then Grace disappeared again. Not vanished completely this time. Carmen saw how she did it. A step into shadow. A turn of the shoulder. Stillness. The human eye looked for movement. Grace gave it none. The side service door clicked. The handle turned. A second man entered. He carried no umbrella. Rainwater dripped from his hair onto the tile. His right hand was inside his jacket. He took one step. Then another. His eyes adjusted to the darkness too slowly. Grace let him pass within 2 feet of her. Carmen's lungs locked. The man lifted his weapon toward the lobby. Grace moved. Her hand clamped over his wrist. The pistol angled down. His fingers squeezed once and the shot slammed into the tile floor with a deafening crack. Carmen ducked. The sound tore through the hospital. Patients screamed. Grace drove her elbow into the man's ribs, turned with his weight, and slammed him face first into the wall. The weapon hit the floor. She kicked it under the radiology bench before he could grab it. The man swung wildly. Grace slipped inside the punch and struck him once under the sternum. He folded. She caught his head before it hit the tile, lowering him without a sound except his choking breath. Carmen stared at the bullet hole in the floor. A real bullet. In her hospital. Grace checked the man's pulse, then looked back. He'll breathe. Carmen could barely speak. "That's 2. Grace nodded. 2 left. Grace listened. From the lobby came Daniel's voice, sharp now. "Grace?" Then a gunshot shattered the front glass. Grace's eyes changed. Not fear. Decision. She rose. The shy nurse was gone. Phantom was moving. And the men who had come looking for classified documents were about to learn they had walked into the only hospital in America where the quiet nurse was more dangerous than all of them. The gunshot blew the front glass inward. Not all of it. Just one clean hole first. Then the cracks raced across the door like lightning trapped in ice. Patients screamed from behind closed rooms. Somewhere down the hall, a metal tray hit the floor. The alarm system gave one weak chirp, then another, as if even the building was too shocked to decide what kind of danger this was. Carmen Blake pressed herself against the radiology wall. Her ears rang. Her mouth tasted like copper. Grace Miller was already moving. No gasp. No hesitation. No wasted breath. She crossed the hall low and fast, one hand brushing the wall, eyes cutting left then right, then to the ceiling corners where the emergency lights glowed red. The second attacker lay folded near the service door behind her, breathing hard through his nose. The first remained unconscious by the north stairwell blocked behind the linen cart. 2 down. 2 still outside. And somewhere in surgery, Evan Mercer was on an operating table with a bullet in his body and a secret in his blood. Daniel Cross shouted again from the lobby. "Grace." His voice was closer now. Tense. Alive. That mattered. Grace did not answer. She did not call out and give away her position. She turned sharply toward Carmen and made 3 small gestures. "Stay low. Move back. Get the others safe." Carmen understood more than she wanted to. "Grace," she whispered. "The patients." Grace cut her off quietly. "East corridor. Now." Another round hit the front entrance. This time the glass gave way. A sheet of it collapsed inward, scattering across the tile in a bright, terrible rain. The sound filled the hospital. It bounced off the walls, rolled down the hallway, and reached every person hiding behind every door. Then came Caleb Voss's voice. Smooth, calm, almost bored. "Last chance, Grace. Send me Mercer and the drive. No one else gets hurt. The drive." Carmen heard the word and saw Grace's face change. Not much, but enough. So Mercer had brought something. A file. Proof. The kind people killed for, the kind they would walk into a hospital to steal. Dr. Reed's voice came from somewhere near the trauma bay, thin and angry. "This is insane. We need police?" Daniel barked back. "Police are 8 minutes out if we're lucky. Voss needs 2. Grace looked at Carmen. "Go." Carmen did. She did not feel brave. Her knees felt loose. Her hands shook so badly she had to press one palm against the wall as she moved. But she moved anyway. That was the difference. Fear could ride with her. It did not get to drive. She reached the east corridor where Lily Parker crouched beside Mrs. Alvarez and her baby. The young mother was crying silently, one hand over the baby's ear. Lily's face was white but she kept whispering. "You're safe. Stay low. Stay with me." Carmen knelt beside them. "Listen carefully," she said. "We're moving everyone to the old physical therapy room. It has no front windows and a heavy door." Lily nodded fast. "What about Grace?" Carmen looked back down the hall. For one split second, she saw Grace slip across the opening near admissions. Just a shadow and blue scrubs gone before the eye could catch her. "She's buying us time," Carmen said. Lily's eyes filled. Carmen touched her shoulder. "Then we don't waste it." No one asked her to. No one thanked her. She just did it. Carmen opened doors one by one, keeping her body low, her voice soft but firm. "Come with me." Quietly. An elderly man with a cane. A teenager clutching his phone. A father with a bandaged hand. Two children who had stopped crying because terror had pushed them past tears. Carmen moved them like she had moved patients through fire drills for years, except this time the fire had a gun and knew Grace's name. At the far end of the hall, she reached the trauma bay and found Dr. Reed standing frozen beside the counter. His face was damp with sweat. His phone was in his hand. "I called 911, he said. "They said units are responding." "Good," Carmen said. "Now help me move people." He blinked at her. For a moment the old Reed tried to return. The man who gave orders. The man who expected rooms to bend around him. Then another gunshot cracked from the lobby. He flinched. Hard. Carmen did not. "Thomas," she said, voice low and sharp, "you can be embarrassed later. Right now carry that oxygen tank and move." Something in him broke. Or maybe something finally woke up. He grabbed the oxygen tank. Carmen pointed toward the physical therapy room. There. Together they moved the last patients out of the line of fire. Behind them Grace had reached the lobby. She crouched behind the admissions desk close enough to hear Voss stepping through broken glass. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. He entered slowly, not like the others. He knew she might be near. He knew what she could do. His right hand stayed inside his coat, but Grace watched his left shoulder. That was where the real movement would begin. Daniel was behind the far column, pistol drawn now, breathing controlled. He and Grace saw each other through the dark. No words. They did not need any. Voss stopped in the center of the lobby. Rain blew in behind him, cold and silver. "Still protecting strangers," he called. "That was always your flaw." Grace stayed hidden. Voss smiled toward the darkness. "You could have disappeared forever, you know. But you picked a hospital. You picked people. That means leverage." Grace's jaw tightened. He was trying to pull her out. Make her angry. Make her rush. Make her choose emotion over position. She had survived men like him by refusing to give them the version of her they wanted. Daniel shifted behind the column. Voss heard the smallest scrape. His gun came up. Grace moved first. She threw a metal clipboard across the lobby. It struck the vending machine with a loud bang. Voss turned toward the sound just half a second. Daniel fired. The shot hit Voss's weapon hand, not his chest. The pistol flew from Voss's grip and skidded across the floor. Voss staggered back with a shout, blood darkening his sleeve. Grace rose from behind the desk. "Down," she said. Voss laughed through his pain. "You still won't kill unless you have to." Grace stepped closer, keeping distance, keeping angle. "You should hope I don't have to." Behind Voss, the fourth man appeared at the broken doorway, weapon raised toward Daniel. Carmen saw him from the hall. She had come back for the emergency keys. She saw the gun. She saw Daniel exposed. She saw Grace turn toward Voss. There was no time. Carmen grabbed the nearest thing on the counter. A full stainless steel bedpan. She threw it with everything she had. It spun through the dim lobby and smashed into the fourth man's face with a hollow metallic crack. He shouted, stumbled, and fired into the ceiling. Grace turned. Daniel lunged. The man tried to recover, but Grace was already there. She kicked his knee sideways, caught his gun wrist, and drove him down across the broken glass. Daniel stripped the weapon from his hand. Grace pinned the man's shoulder with one knee until he stopped fighting. Then the lobby went quiet. Not peaceful. Quiet the way a battlefield goes quiet right before people realize they are still alive. Carmen stood at the hallway entrance, breathing hard. The bedpan lay on the floor, dented. Daniel stared at it. Then at her. "Nice throw," he said. Carmen's voice shook. "I was aiming for his chest." Grace looked at her. For one brief second the corner of her mouth moved. Almost a smile. Then Voss groaned. He was on his knees now, one hand clamped around his bleeding wrist, his perfect suit torn, his umbrella lying broken in the rainwater and glass. Grace approached him slowly. "Where's the backup team?" she asked. Voss smiled up at her, pale but still venomous. You think this ends in a lobby? Grace crouched in front of him. No, she said. I think this started 8 years ago. His smile faded. That hit him. Daniel stepped closer. Mercer has the real file, doesn't he? Voss said nothing. Grace leaned in, her voice almost gentle. You shot him to stop him from reaching me. But he made it. He said the name. He brought the drive. And now you walked into a hospital full of cameras, witnesses and police on the way? Voss's eyes flicked once. Toward surgery. Grace saw it. Daniel saw Grace see it. The real danger was not over. Voss was not the whole plan. He was a distraction. Grace rose fast. Carmen. Carmen straightened. What? R3. Now. Carmen's face drained. Evan Mercer. The wounded man. The classified drive. The proof. Grace turned toward the surgical wing and began to run. Not away from the danger. Toward the one place in the hospital where a half-dead man might be holding the truth that had kept her buried for 8 years. Behind her, police sirens finally wailed in the distance. Too late to stop the first attack. Maybe too late to stop the second. Grace did not look back. She just ran. Carmen Blake did not know why her legs kept moving. Her body wanted to stop. Her heart wanted to hide. Her mind kept showing her the same image. Broken glass in the lobby, a man's gun lifting, the dented bedpan spinning through the air, but Grace Miller was running toward surgery and Carmen followed. No one ordered her twice. No one promised she would be safe. No one told her she was brave, she just ran. The hallway to the surgical wing looked longer than it ever had before. Emergency lights flashed red against the walls. The floor shined with rainwater tracked in from the lobby. Somewhere behind them, Caleb Voss groaned as Daniel Cross kept him pinned. Police sirens wailed outside, still too far away to matter. Carmen rounded the corner and nearly slipped. Grace caught her by the elbow without slowing. Stay behind me, Grace said. Carmen sucked in air. You think someone is already inside? Grace's eyes stayed forward. I think Voss wanted us looking at the front door. That answer hit Carmen harder than yes. At the end of the hall, a set of double doors led to the surgical unit. A red sign above them read authorized personnel only. Carmen had walked through those doors thousands of times. Today they looked like the mouth of a trap. Grace stopped 10 feet away. Carmen almost ran into her back. What? Carmen whispered. Grace raised one hand. Listen. Carmen listened. At first she heard only her own breathing. Too loud. Too fast. Then the soft hum of overhead lights. The distant beep of monitors. The muffled voices of staff somewhere behind thick walls. Then she heard it. A cartwheel. One short squeak. Then silence. Grace lowered her body slightly, eyes fixed on the narrow window and the surgical doors. Who should be in there? She whispered. Carmen forced her mind to work. OR3 has Mercer. Dr. Patel, 2 surgical nurses, anesthesiology. Maybe a tech. How many security doors between here and OR3? 2. Badge access. Yes. Any door that sticks. Carmen shook her head, then froze. The scrub room door. It closes, but the latch sometimes bounces if you don't pull it hard. Grace's jaw tightened. That's where they'll go. Carmen felt sick. The men in the lobby had not been the whole attack. They had been noise. A distraction. Something loud enough to pull every eye forward while someone quieter moved for the wounded man. And Carmen had almost missed it. Almost. Grace looked at her. Can you shut down access from here? Carmen nodded. There's a nurse control panel by the wall. Do it. Carmen moved to the panel, hands shaking over the buttons. She had used it for routine lockdowns, patient privacy drills. Never for armed killers moving through surgery. Her finger hovered. Then she pressed the lock sequence. A low buzz ran through the hall. One door locked. Then another. Carmen looked at the screen. Our corridor is sealed. Grace glanced at the panel. Can it be overridden inside? Yes. Of course, Grace muttered. Then a muffled shout came from beyond the doors. Carmen's blood went cold. Grace pushed through first. The surgical hallway was bright, too bright after the dark lobby. White walls. Blue floor. Stainless steel carts. The smell of antiseptic so sharp it burned the nose. A surgical nurse stood near the scrub room with both hands raised. A man in green scrubs stood behind her. Wrong shoes. That was the first thing Carmen noticed. Everyone in surgery wore hospital clogs or clean surgical covers. This man wore black tactical boots under the scrub pants. His mask covered half his face. His cap hid his hair. But nothing could hide the gun pressed against the nurse's ribs. Carmen stopped. Grace did not. The man turned at the sound of the doors. Stop, he said. Grace stopped instantly. Not because she was afraid. Because the nurse was too close to the weapon, The nurse's eyes were wide and wet above her mask. Her name was Angela. 46 years old. 3 kids. Worked double shifts. Brought banana bread every Christmas. Carmen knew all that in one painful flash. The man looked at Grace, then Carmen. Hands where I can see them. Grace lifted her hands slowly. Carmen did the same. The man smiled under his mask. Lieutenant Miller, you're smaller than the stories. Grace's face stayed empty. Stories grow when men are scared. His smile vanished. Angela trembled. Carmen could see the gun barrel pressing harder into her side. The man spoke again. Where is Mercer's drive? Grace said nothing. He pressed the gun deeper into Angela's ribs. Angela whimpered. Carmen moved half a step without thinking. The gun snapped toward her. Don't. Grace's voice came sharp. Look at me. The man's eyes flicked back to her. Grace had pulled him off Carmen with 3 words. Carmen understood then. Grace was not just standing there, she was managing his attention. His breathing, his pride, his trigger finger. Every second mattered. Mercer is in surgery, Grace said. If you fire that weapon, every officer outside comes through this hall. The man laughed softly. Police are busy with Voss. Voss is bleeding on my lobby floor. That hit him. A tiny pause. Grace saw it. Carmen saw Grace see it. The man adjusted his grip on Angela. Then give me the drive and I walk out. You don't know where it is, Grace said. I know Mercer carried it. Then you shot the wrong place. The man's eyes narrowed. Grace continued calm and cold. He would never keep it on his body after making contact. He was communications. He knew tracking. He knew extraction protocol. The man hesitated. Carmen did not know if Grace was telling the truth. That was the terrifying part. Neither did he. Behind the man, the scrub room door stood open. A stainless steel cart sat halfway out, one wheel angled wrong. That was the squeak Carmen had heard. On the cart was a covered tray. Carmen's eyes dropped to it. Too long. The man noticed. His head turned slightly. Grace moved. Not toward him. Toward the wall. She slapped the emergency oxygen release. A loud hiss exploded through the corridor. The man flinched. Angela ducked. Grace closed the distance in 2 steps. Her left hand trapped the gun wrist and drove it upward. The weapon fired once into the ceiling, blowing dust and plaster into the bright surgical light. Carmen grabbed Angela by the shoulders and pulled her down behind the cart. The man swung at Grace with his free hand. Grace stepped inside the punch and drove her elbow into his throat. He staggered but did not fall. He was trained too. He grabbed Grace's scrub top and slammed her into the wall hard enough to shake the framed hand-washing sign. Carmen shouted, Grace. Grace did not answer. The man drove a knee toward her ribs. She turned just enough to take it on her hip, then hooked her foot behind his ankle and twisted. He hit the floor on one knee. The gun skidded loose. Carmen saw it slide toward her. For 1 second she froze. A gun? On the hospital floor. 3 feet away. The man lunged for it. Carmen kicked it with everything she had. It spun under the scrub sink and disappeared behind the pipes. The man's eyes snapped to her. Pure rage. He moved toward Carmen. Grace hit him from the side. They crashed into the cart. Metal trays clattered across the floor. Instruments scattered. Angela crawled backward, sobbing. Grace and the attacker struggled in the spilled light, both silent except for hard breathing and the scrape of shoes. He was bigger. Stronger. But Grace was faster. And meaner in the way only survival makes a person. She caught his wrist, turned under his arm and locked his shoulder. He grunted, tried to break free, and Grace drove him face first into the edge of the scrub sink. Once. He sagged. Grace caught him before he hit the floor too loudly and lowered him down. Carmen stared. Her breath came in pieces. Grace checked his pulse. Alive. Carmen almost laughed. Almost cried. She did neither. Angela was shaking against the wall. Carmen dropped beside her. Are you hit? Angela shook her head. Look at me. Breathe. I thought he was staff. Angela whispered. He had a badge. Carmen looked at Grace. Grace was already searching the man. She pulled a stolen hospital badge from his scrub pocket, then a black radio, then a small syringe capped in plastic. Carmen's stomach turned. What is that? Grace held it up to the light. Something meant for Mercer. Angela covered her mouth. The surgical doors to R3 opened. Dr. Patel stepped out in a blood-streaked gown, eyes furious above his mask. What the hell is going on out here? Grace turned toward him. Is Mercer alive? Patel looked from Grace to the unconscious man on the floor. Barely. But yes. Did anyone enter your OR? No. We locked it when we heard the shot. Grace nodded. Good. Carmen stood slowly, one hand still on Angela's shoulder. Her knees were shaking now. The fear was catching up. But beneath it something else was there. A strange steady certainty. She had trusted Grace when none of it made sense. She had cleared the lobby, moved the patients, locked the doors, cut the lights, spotted the weak hallway. Followed into danger. Not because she understood everything. Because she understood enough. Grace Miller was trying to save people. And that was all Carmen needed. Daniel Cross burst through the surgical doors a moment later, pistol low, face hard. He saw the attacker on the floor. Saw Grace still standing. Saw Carmen beside Angela. What happened? Carmen answered before Grace could. He came through the scrub room. Grace stopped him. Daniel looked at Carmen. Then at the attacker. Then back at Carmen. And you? Carmen swallowed. I kicked the gun under the sink. Daniel nodded once, solemn as a salute. Good work. Carmen felt her throat tighten. Grace looked at her too. No big speech. No dramatic praise. Just a quiet look that said you held. For Carmen it was enough. Then Dr. Patel spoke from the OR doorway. He's asking for her. Everyone turned. Grace stepped closer. Mercer. Patel nodded. He woke up for 10 seconds. Said one thing. Daniel's face darkened. What? Patel looked at Grace. He said, tell Phantom the drive is not with me. Grace's eyes sharpened. Carmen felt the world tilt again. Patel continued. He said, it's already inside the hospital. Silence. The kind that made every machine beep sound too loud. Carmen looked down the bright surgical hallway past locked doors, carts, supply rooms, staff rooms, patients hiding from gunfire. Inside the hospital. Not on Mercer. Not with Voss. Already inside. Grace closed her eyes for half a second. When she opened them, Phantom was back. Carmen, she said. Carmen straightened. Pull every security feed from the last hour. Carmen nodded once. This time she did not ask why. She did not hesitate. She just moved. Daniel Cross knew the difference between panic and preparation. Panic was loud. Preparation was quiet. And what Grace Miller had done inside Harborview Medical Center was not panic. It was a battlefield. Daniel stood in the surgical hallway, staring at the doors, the corners, the locked rooms, the emergency lights, the people hiding behind walls. He saw it now. Every move Grace had made since the first black SUV rolled into the parking lot had not been random. The fake gas leak. The cleared lobby. The locked medication door. The darkened lights. The blocked stairwell. The patients moved away from glass. She had not been evacuating a hospital. She had been shaping the fight. Grace had turned the building into something Voss's men could not read. She had taken their advantage, surprise, fear, confusion, and cut it into pieces. Daniel felt a cold respect settle in his chest. 8 years had passed. She had changed her name, she had hidden in scrubs. She had let arrogant doctors speak down to her. But Phantom was still Phantom. Carmen Blake moved fast toward the security office, her shoes striking the floor in sharp, steady beats. She did not look back. Lily followed her for 3 steps, then stopped when Grace lifted one hand. Stay with the patients, Grace said. Lily swallowed. But Carmen? She knows where she's going. That was not comfort. It was trust. And Lily seemed to understand the difference. She nodded, wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist and hurried back toward the old physical therapy room where the patients were waiting in the dark. Dr. Reed stood near the scrub room, still holding the oxygen tank from earlier, as if he had forgotten how to put it down. His face had changed. Not completely. Pride does not die in one afternoon. It bleeds slowly. But something in him had cracked open. He had seen Grace stop bleeding that should have killed a man. He had seen armed strangers walk into his hospital wearing stolen badges. He had seen Carmen, the woman he often ignored, throw a bedpan at a gunman and keep moving like the building depended on her. And now he understood, maybe for the first time that day, that volume was not courage. Grace looked at him. Doctor. He blinked. What? Or 3 stays locked. No one enters without Carmen or me clearing them first. His jaw tightened at the command. Then he looked at the unconscious man on the floor. The stolen badge. The capped syringe. Angela shaking against the wall. He nodded. One small nod. It cost him something. Grace saw that. She did not reward it. She did not humiliate him either. Good, she said. Daniel almost smiled again. Grace Miller could make one word sound like a field order, a warning, and a mercy all at once. Then her eyes shifted to him. Voss. Pinned in the lobby, Daniel said. Wounded hand. Breathing. Talking too much. Did he say anything useful? He smiled when Patel said the drive was already inside. Grace's expression hardened. Daniel caught it. You think he knows where it is? No, Grace said. I think he knows who brought it in. That landed. Daniel turned toward the hallway where Carmen had disappeared. Mercer didn't have it on him, he said. No. Then he handed it off before he got shot. Or hid it after he got here. Daniel shook his head. He was bleeding out. Grace looked toward the operating room. He was communications support. Men like Mercer can move data faster than most people can breathe. Daniel knew she was right. Mercer had once routed satellite packets through a fishing boat, a weather station, and an abandoned school computer in under 4 minutes while half the team was pinned behind a stone wall. If anyone could smuggle a file into a hospital while dying, it was Evan Mercer. A radio crackled on the floor beside the unconscious attacker. Daniel bent, picked it up, and turned the volume low. Static. Then a voice. Unit 3 report. Daniel and Grace froze. The voice came again, softer now. Unit 3, do you have Mercer? Grace took the radio from Daniel. She listened. Carmen's voice suddenly echoed from farther down the hall. Grace. Grace was already moving. Daniel followed. They found Carmen at the security office door, one hand on the handle, the other braced against the wall. She was breathing hard, but not from running. From what she had seen, the security office was small, windowless, and lit by 6 monitor screens. A half-eaten sandwich sat on the desk. A paper cup had tipped over, spilling coffee across a stack of visitor logs. The security guard was gone. Not dead. Not unconscious. Gone. His chair rolled backward from the console. His jacket hung on the hook. His radio lay on the floor. Carmen pointed at the screens. Camera feed is delayed. Grace stepped in. Daniel looked at the monitors. The lobby feed showed the front doors still intact. Impossible. The glass had been shattered minutes ago. The east corridor feed showed patients still sitting in the waiting room. Impossible. They had already been moved. The surgical hallway feed showed nothing but an empty floor. Impossible. They were standing in it. Daniel's face went dark. Looped footage. Grace nodded. Voss had eyes inside before he arrived. Carmen leaned over the keyboard. I can pull the raw archive. Maybe local storage still has it. Grace looked at the door. Do it fast. Carmen sat down. Her hands shook once over the keyboard. Then she forced them still. She typed. The screens flickered. A password prompt appeared. Carmen cursed under her breath. Security changed the admin code last month. Dr. Reed arrived behind them, still pale. Try HMC 2026. Carmen looked back at him. How do you know that? He looked uncomfortable. I complained until they gave it to me. I hated waiting for maintenance to unlock my office camera. For once, his arrogance was useful. Carmen typed the code. The system opened. Grace glanced at Reed. He looked away. Carmen pulled up the raw feed from 1135 a.m. The first image showed the lobby before the chaos. Patients waiting. Lily at the front desk. Rain on the glass. Then the feed jumped. Carmen scrubbed backward. There, Grace said. Carmen stopped. On the screen, 3 men entered carrying Evan Mercer. Daniel leaned closer. Grace did not watch the wounded man. She watched everyone else. Mercer's left hand hung low. Blood dripped from his side. One of Daniel's men held his shoulder. The other pushed the door open. Then Mercer's fingers moved. Tiny motion. Almost nothing. He dropped something. Not onto the floor. Into a stack of folded patient blankets on a rolling cart near admissions. Carmen whispered, "Oh my God." The cart. Grace straightened. Where is that cart now? Carmen switched cameras, scrubbing forward. The cart was moved by Lily during the fake gas leak evacuation. It rolled down the east corridor. Past room 2. Past the medication station. Into. Carmen stopped breathing. The physical therapy room, she said. Daniel's eyes closed for half a second. The patients. The drive was in the room with the patients. Grace was already out the door. This time she ran. Daniel ran after her. Carmen pushed herself from the chair and followed, but Dr. Reed caught her arm. You stay here, he said. She stared at his hand. He let go immediately. Then he surprised her. I'll go. Carmen blinked. What? Reed swallowed. His face was still pale. His voice was rough. You know the system. Keep pulling feeds. If there are more of them, she needs to know. I'll help with the patients. Carmen studied him for one beat. Maybe he was trying to redeem himself. Maybe he was terrified. Maybe both. She nodded. Take the South Service Hall. It's faster. Reed nodded and ran. Carmen turned back to the monitors. Her fear was still there. But now it had a job. In the east corridor, Grace slowed before the physical therapy room. Daniel nearly passed her but stopped when she raised 2 fingers. Listen. Behind the closed door, people whispered. A baby whimpered. Lily murmured comfort. No screams. No strange voices. Grace reached for the handle. Daniel covered the hallway. She opened the door slowly. Inside, 20 frightened people sat on the floor between exercise mats and old therapy equipment. Lily stood near the back wall holding a metal crutch like a spear. Mrs. Alvarez held her baby against her chest. The old man with the newspaper had one arm around two children who were not his. Grace scanned the room. Blanket cart. Back corner. Untouched. Lily saw her and exhaled like she had been holding her breath for years. "Grace," she whispered. Grace moved to the cart. No explanation. She lifted the top blanket. Nothing. Second blanket. Nothing. Third. A small black flash drive taped inside a folded gauze wrapper. Daniel stared. 8 years. All the bodies. All the lies. All the names carved into stone. There it was. Smaller than a thumb. Grace picked it up. For 1 second the whole room seemed to hold its breath. Then, the radio in Daniel's hand crackled. Different voice this time. Cold, calm. Phantom has the drive. Grace's eyes lifted. Carmen's voice burst through the hospital intercom, urgent and shaking. "Grace, they're inside the east corridor." A child began to cry. Daniel raised his pistol. Lily tightened both hands around the crutch. Grace closed her fist around the drive. Now, Daniel understood completely. The evacuation had never been a drill. The darkness had never been fear. The locked doors had never been retreat. Grace had been preparing the battlefield. And the final fight had just moved to the room full of civilians. The physical therapy room became silent in a way no hospital room should ever be silent. No coughing. No whispering. No movement. Just the soft sound of a baby fighting not to cry. Grace Miller stood beside the blanket cart with the black flash drive closed inside her fist. The thing was tiny. Barely larger than a thumbnail. But in that moment it felt heavier than every weapon ever pointed at her. 8 years of lies. 8 years of dead men. 8 years of being buried alive under another name. And now the truth was in her hand. Daniel Cross stood near the door, pistol low but ready, his eyes locked on the east corridor. Lily Parker gripped the metal crutch so tightly her fingers had gone white. Doctor. Thomas Reed had just arrived through the South Service Hall, breathing hard, his shirt damp with sweat, the oxygen tank forgotten somewhere behind him. Then Carmen Blake's voice cracked through the intercom again. "Grace, 2 men in the east corridor. Moving toward physical therapy. 30 feet out." Daniel's jaw tightened. 2 more. Grace looked at the closed door. "No," she said. "The last 2. Reed's face drained. "We have patients in here." Grace's eyes swept the room. 20 civilians. An elderly man, 2 children. A mother with a baby. A teenager trying to look brave and failing. A father with a bandaged hand. Lily trembling but still standing. Reed proud and afraid. Daniel ready to fight. And Grace. The quiet nurse no one had understood until the hospital became a battlefield. She turned to Lily. "Move everyone behind the parallel bars." Lily blinked. "What?" "The therapy bars. Now." Lily moved instantly. "Everybody crawl," she whispered, then louder, stronger. "Stay low. Behind the bars. Keep your heads down." People obeyed because fear made them fast and Lily made them believe there was still a plan. Grace pointed to Dr. Reed. "Help her." Reed hesitated for less than a second. Then he dropped to one knee and guided the old man down behind the equipment. "This way," he said, voice rough but steady. "Come on. Stay low. You're doing fine." Grace noticed. She said nothing. But she noticed. Daniel moved closer to her. "We hold the door." Grace shook her head. "They expect that." He looked at her. "Then what?" Grace's eyes lifted toward the ceiling. Above the room, the old acoustic tiles sagged slightly in their metal frame. Behind them ran the maintenance crawl space that connected the therapy room to the radiology hall, and beyond that, the supply corridor. Carmen had mentioned it weeks ago, complaining that the ceiling always leaked near the air vent. Grace remembered. She always remembered. Daniel followed her gaze. "No," he said quietly. Grace looked at him. "You don't even know what I'm thinking." "I know exactly what you're thinking." The radio in Daniel's hand crackled. A man's voice came through, low and close. "Door in 10 seconds. Grace stepped onto the therapy bench. Daniel caught her arm. "Grace." She looked down at his hand. He let go. "Old habit. Old respect." "I'll draw them in," Daniel said. "No. You can't do everything alone." "I'm not." She looked toward Lily. Toward Reed. Toward the patients hidden behind the therapy bars. Toward the intercom speaker where Carmen waited in the security office, watching blind corners through broken camera feeds. Then back to Daniel. "They're part of it now." Daniel understood. Grace reached up, pushed one ceiling tile aside and pulled herself into the darkness above. No dramatic leap. No wasted motion. Just one clean lift. Then she was gone. The room below held its breath. Daniel stepped back from the door and took cover behind a thick wooden therapy cabinet. He angled himself so he could see the entrance without exposing the patients. Everyone stay down, he whispered. No one argued. Outside the door, footsteps stopped. One man. Then another. A voice called through the wood. Lieutenant Miller. Door opens or we open it. Daniel said nothing. Reed crouched beside the old man, his face pale, one hand pressed protectively against the shoulder of a crying child. The little boy stared at him with huge eyes. Reed whispered, "Don't look at the door. Look at me." The boy nodded. For the first time all day, Thomas Reed sounded like a doctor instead of a ruler. The handle turned. Locked. The first blow hit the door near the latch. Boom. The baby cried once. Mrs. Alvarez covered the child's mouth gently, tears streaming down her face. Second blow. Boom. Wood cracked. Lily closed her eyes. Daniel raised his pistol. Third blow. The door burst inward. Two men entered fast. Dark clothes. Compact weapons. Professional movement, but they entered expecting Grace at floor level. She was not there. Daniel fired once, low, striking the first man's thigh. The man dropped with a shout, weapon swinging toward Daniel. The second man pivoted toward the cabinet. Cross. Daniel ducked as a shot tore into the wall above him, showering plaster across his shoulder. Patience screamed. Reed threw his body over the child beside him. Lily crawled forward and yanked Mrs. Alvarez farther behind the bars. The second man advanced, weapon raised. Then the ceiling above him broke open. Grace dropped from the maintenance space like a shadow with weight. Her knees hit his shoulders. Her left hand caught his gun wrist. Her right forearm locked across his throat. The impact drove him to the floor so hard the weapon skidded out of his hand and spun across the tile. He tried to roll. Grace rolled with him. He reached for a knife at his ankle. Grace was already there. She trapped his wrist, twisted, and slammed his hand against the floor once. The knife fell. She kicked it under the therapy mat. The wounded first man tried to lift his gun from the doorway. Daniel moved to fire, but a patient was too close behind the angle. Lily saw it. So did Reed. The gun came up. Reed grabbed the oxygen tank he had dragged in without realizing it and shoved it across the floor with both hands. The heavy cylinder slammed into the man's injured leg. He screamed. His shot went wild, blowing apart the top of a cabinet. Daniel crossed the room in 2 strides and kicked the weapon away. Stay down, Daniel snapped. The man stayed down. Grace still fought the second attacker. He was strong. He got one knee under himself and drove backward, slamming her into the therapy mirror. Glass cracked behind her, spider webbing around her shoulder. Carmen's voice burst through the intercom. Grace, watch his left hand. The attacker's left hand disappeared under his jacket. Grace reacted instantly. She drove her forehead into his face. Once. Hard. His head snapped back. She stripped a small backup pistol from his hand, cleared it, and tossed it to Daniel. Then she hooked her arm under his chin and pressed 2 fingers beneath his jawline. A nerve hold. His body fought for 3 seconds. Then his eyes rolled and he collapsed. Grace lowered him to the floor. Not gently, but alive. The whole room stayed frozen. No one moved. No one breathed. Grace rose slowly from the floor, blue scrubs torn at the shoulder, hair loose from its tie, one cheek streaked with dust from the ceiling. She looked at the 2 men. Both down? Then at Daniel. Alive. Then at Lily. Alive. Then at Reed. Alive. Then at the patients. Alive. Only then did she open her fist. The flash drive was still there. Small. Black. Undamaged. Daniel exhaled. Lily began to cry silently. Mrs. Alvarez pulled her baby close and whispered, "Thank you, thank you." Grace did not answer. She crossed to the door, checked the corridor, then bent and stripped radios and weapons from the 2 attackers. Her movements were still precise, still controlled, but slower now. The fight had cost her. Carmen could see it through the security camera feed. Grace touched her earpiece. "Carmen." "I'm here," Carmen answered, over the intercom, voice shaking. "Any more?" A pause. Then Carmen said, "No movement on the feeds." "Police entering the lobby now?" Sirens screamed outside. "Real ones now?" Boots pounded through the front entrance. Voices shouted commands. Daniel stepped out into the hallway with both hands visible and his weapon placed on the floor before officers could mistake him for the threat. Dr. Reed slowly stood from behind the therapy bars. His shirt was dusty. His hands trembled. The child he had shielded clung to his sleeve. Reed looked at Grace. For once there was no smirk. No lecture. No superiority. Only shock. And something close to shame. "You saved them," he said. Grace looked around the room. At Lily. At Carmen's voice through the speaker. At Daniel lowering his hands for the police. At Reed standing between a child and danger. "No," she said quietly. "We did." No one spoke after that. Because everyone knew what had happened. The shy nurse had vanished into the ceiling. And Phantom had come down. Police flooded Harborview Medical Center with their weapons raised and their voices sharp. Hands where we can see them. Down on the floor. Move away from the door. The patients screamed all over again. Daniel Cross stepped into the hallway first, both hands open, his pistol already on the floor. He did not argue. He did not explain. He knew what armed officers saw when they entered a building after gunfire. Movement, weapons, blood, threats. So he stayed still. Grace Miller stood behind him in the doorway of the physical therapy room, blue scrubs torn at the shoulder, dust in her hair, a thin red line across her cheek where broken mirror glass had kissed the skin. Her hands were empty. The flash drive was not. It was tucked deep inside the folded gauze wrapper in her pocket. Small enough to hide. Heavy enough to ruin lives. 2 officers rushed past her toward the fallen attackers. Another officer helped Mrs. Alvarez and her baby out from behind the therapy bars. Lily Parker guided the elderly man with the cane toward the hall. Doctor? Thomas Reed stood with one hand on the shoulder of the little boy he had shielded, his face still pale, his eyes still fixed on Grace as if he were seeing her for the first time. Maybe he was. Carmen Blake came running from the security office with a tablet clutched against her chest. Grace, she called. An officer turned sharply. Ma'am, stay back. Carmen did not stop. I'm the head nurse. I have camera footage, looped feeds, armed intruders, and one unconscious man dressed like a fake surgical tech near OR3. The officer blinked. Carmen pushed past him anyway. She reached Grace and stopped short. For half a second she looked at the woman in front of her. Not the nurse from room 3. Not the quiet woman who stirred black coffee in the break room, not the employee Dr. Reed had dismissed all morning. This woman had fallen from a ceiling and taken down armed killers without firing a shot near civilians. Carmen's voice softened. Are you hurt? Grace looked almost confused by the question. No. Daniel glanced at the cut on her cheek. That's a lie. Grace ignored him. Carmen's eyes dropped to the torn scrub sleeve, the bruising already darkening near Grace's collarbone. Sit down, Carmen said. Grace shook her head. Mercer first. Daniel stepped closer. Grace. No, she said, and this time there was steel in it. Mercer first. The name cut through the hallway. An officer in a navy jacket turned toward her. He was older, maybe 55, with tired eyes and a badge clipped to his belt. Who is Mercer? He asked. Daniel looked at Grace. Grace looked back. A silent question passed between them. How much? How fast? How dangerous? Then the surgical doors opened. Dr. Patel appeared in blood-marked scrubs, mask hanging loose around his neck. He's alive, he said. Grace's shoulders lowered by 1 inch. Only Daniel noticed. Patel continued. But he lost a lot of blood. He keeps trying to talk. I told him if he tears those stitches I'll sedate him myself. Can he speak? Grace asked. For maybe 30 seconds. Grace started toward OR3. The officer stepped in front of her. Nobody goes anywhere until I know what happened here. Grace stopped. She looked at his badge. Detective Harris, she said. His eyes narrowed. I didn't give you my name. It's on your badge. You read that from 6 feet away? Grace did not answer. Daniel muttered. She reads smaller print from farther away. Detective Harris looked between them. Carmen lifted the tablet. Detective people tried to kill a patient in surgery. If she says Mercer matters, he matters. Harris studied Carmen's face. She was shaking, she was furious. She was not lying. Finally, he stepped aside. 30 seconds, he said. And I'm coming. Grace nodded once. They walked through the surgical hallway together. Daniel at her left. Carmen behind her. Harris beside them. Reed followed at a distance, no longer commanding anything but unable to look away. Outside OR3, Dr. Patel blocked the door with one arm. One at a time, he said. Grace looked at him. Patel looked back, then moved aside. All right, he muttered. But if he crashes, everyone gets out. Grace entered. The room was bright, cold, and sharp with the smell of antiseptic and blood. Evan Mercer lay under white sheets, tubes in his arms, his face hollow, his lips cracked. The man who had been carried through the clinic doors like a dying stranger now looked smaller without the chaos around him. His eyes opened when Grace stepped near the bed. For a moment he did not see a nurse. He saw a ghost. His mouth moved. Phantom. Grace stood still. Behind her, Detective Harris looked up. Daniel's jaw tightened. Carmen felt the word hit the room like thunder wrapped in a whisper. Grace leaned closer. You made it, Mercer. His lips pulled into something almost like a smile. Barely. Who sent Voss? Mercer's eyes shifted toward the others. Grace understood. They know enough, she said. Mercer breathed in. It rattled in his chest. The file proves it. Red Canyon. The ambush. The extraction route wasn't leaked. He swallowed hard, pain twisting his face. It was sold. Daniel went rigid. For 8 years he had carried suspicion like a stone in his ribs. Now the stone became a blade. Sold by who, he asked. Mercer's eyelids fluttered. Grace touched his wrist. Stay with me. He forced one more breath. Voss arranged it. But he wasn't the top. Names are on the drive. Orders. Payment trails. Satellite logs. His eyes found Grace again. They marked the whole team expendable. Carmen's stomach turned. Expendable. A clean word for murder. Mercer's hand twitched against the sheet. Grace placed her fingers near his palm. He tried to squeeze. Couldn't. They said you died, he whispered. Grace's face did not move. Mercer's eyes filled anyway. We all thought you died. Daniel looked away. Grace lowered her voice. I had to disappear. Mercer gave a faint nod. I know now. Detective Harris stepped closer. Lieutenant Miller, I need to understand who you are. Grace straightened slowly. For a second no one spoke. Only the machines did. Beep, beep, beep. Then Daniel answered, voice low. She was Navy. Grace looked at him but did not stop him. Daniel continued. Special Operations Attachment. Classified Unit, Long-Range Overwatch Field Medicine Extraction Support. Detective Harris frowned. A nurse. Grace finally spoke. A SEAL sniper. The words seemed to remove all air from the room. Carmen stared at her. Dr. Reed stood just outside the door, frozen. Even Patel, who had been adjusting a monitor, stopped with his hand midair. Grace did not say it proudly. She said it like a fact she had spent 8 years trying not to be. Daniel looked at Harris. Her call sign was Phantom. Carmen remembered the ceiling. The darkness. The impossible silence. The men dropping before they understood where she was. Phantom. Now the name made terrible sense. Detective Harris looked at Grace again, slower this time. You're telling me a former SEAL sniper has been working as a nurse in my city under her real name? Grace's mouth tightened. Part of it. And these men came here because of a classified file. They came here because Mercer found proof that my team was deliberately sent into a kill zone 8 years ago, Grace said. They came here because that proof names people who are still powerful. Mercer's monitor began to spike. Dr. Patel stepped in immediately. That's enough. Mercer fought to keep his eyes open. Grace, he rasped. She leaned down. Don't bury it again. For the first time all day something in her face cracked. Not much. But enough for Carmen to see the woman under the weapon. Grace nodded. I won't. Mercer's eyes closed. Patel moved fast, checking lines, calling for medication. Everyone out. Daniel pulled Grace back gently. This time she let him. They stepped into the hallway. The police radio chatter echoed from the lobby. Officers shouted updates. The wounded attackers were being restrained. Caleb Voss was alive, bleeding, and very quiet. Dr. Reed stood near the wall staring at Grace as if every cruel word he had said that morning had returned and lodged in his throat. You were, all that time, he began. Grace looked at him. He could not finish. A shy nurse, a quiet nurse. A woman he thought he could dismiss with a smirk. A SEAL sniper. A survivor of a betrayed mission. A ghost who had hidden in plain sight while saving lives under his roof. Carmen stepped beside Grace. You protected this hospital, she said. Grace looked down the hallway at the patients being led to safety. No, she said softly. I brought danger to it. Carmen shook her head. Danger came looking for you. There's a difference. Grace did not answer. Daniel looked toward the lobby, where officers were dragging Voss to his feet. Then we finish it, he said. Grace reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded gauze wrapper. Inside it, the black flash drive rested in her palm. So small, so quiet, so deadly. Detective Harris looked at it. What's on that thing? Grace closed her fingers around it. The reason they called me a ghost. She turned toward the lobby. And the reason I'm done hiding. The black flash drive looked harmless in Grace Miller's hand. That was the thing that made it terrifying. No blood on it. No warning label. No weight anyone could feel by looking. Just a tiny piece of plastic and metal smaller than a house key wrapped in gauze and carried into Harborview Medical Center by a dying man who had crossed half the country with a bullet in his side. Detective Harris stared at it. Daniel Cross stared at it too, but his face had gone somewhere far away. Back 8 years. Back to Red Canyon. Back to the night his team was sent into a valley with the wrong extraction route, the wrong intelligence, and no way out. Carmen Blake stood beside Grace in the surgical hallway, still breathing too fast, one hand resting against the wall as if the building itself was the only thing keeping her steady. Dr. Thomas Reed hovered behind them, silent now. That silence did not belong to him. It looked strange on his face. From the lobby came the sound of police radios and boots crunching over broken glass. Officers were securing the attackers. Paramedics shouted for space. Somewhere near admissions, Caleb Voss was being treated for the gunshot wound to his hand under the watch of 2 armed officers. He was alive. That bothered Grace. Men like Voss were most dangerous when they were breathing. Detective Harris held out his hand. "Lieutenant Miller, I need that drive." Grace did not give it to him. Daniel's eyes flicked to Harris. Carmen saw the tension sharpen instantly. Harris noticed too. His hand stayed out but his voice changed. "I understand this is sensitive." "No," Grace said. "You don't." Harris lowered his hand slowly. "Then explain it to me." Grace looked toward the OR doors. Evan Mercer was alive barely. His body had almost failed bringing this truth to her. The drive was not a file anymore. It was a man bleeding on a table. It was the last breath of everyone who never made it out of Red Canyon. She turned back to Harris. "If I hand this to the wrong person, it disappears before sunset." Harris's jaw tightened. "I'm not the wrong person." "You don't know that." The hallway went still. It was a hard thing to say to a detective standing in his own city surrounded by his own officers. But Grace said it without apology. Harris studied her for a long second. Then he nodded once slowly. "Fair?" Daniel looked surprised. "So did Carmen." Harris stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then we make copies. Right here. On hospital equipment that Voss already compromised, no. On police equipment, maybe compromised too. So we do it the old way." Grace waited. Harris pulled out his phone, removed the battery pack case and showed her the device was powered off. "My partner is 5 minutes out with a sealed forensic laptop from the evidence van. It has no network card active. We open the drive offline. You watch, I watch. Your man watches." Daniel said, "I'm not her man." Grace did not look at him. "He watches." Daniel shut up. Carmen almost smiled, then remembered where she was. Grace studied Harris again. Not his words. His shoulders, his eyes, his breathing. He was tense but not hiding. Angry but not eager. He wanted control but not glory. That mattered. "Fine," Grace said. "But Voss doesn't leave this building." Harris turned toward the lobby. "Voss is under arrest." Grace's eyes hardened. "That is not the same thing." Before Harris could answer, Caleb Voss's voice drifted down the hallway. Weak, pained, still smooth. "You always were dramatic, Grace." Everyone turned. 2 officers were walking him past the end of the corridor toward the ambulance entrance. His wounded hand was wrapped in gauze already red at the center. His suit was torn. His face was pale, but he was smiling. Grace moved before anyone told her not to. Daniel followed. Harris cursed under his breath and followed both of them. They reached the lobby as Voss stopped near the broken front entrance. Rain blew through the shattered doors. Glass glittered across the floor like ice. The black umbrella lay twisted near the welcome mat. Voss looked at Grace. Then at Daniel. Then down at Grace's closed fist. "You haven't opened it yet," he said. Grace did not answer. Voss's smile widened. "Good. There may still be time for you to be smart." Daniel stepped forward. "You sold us out." Voss sighed. Still using simple words for complicated events. Daniel's hand clenched. Grace spoke first. "Red Canyon." That name changed the air. Even Voss's smile thinned. Grace stepped closer, stopping just outside arm's reach. "Mercer said the file proves it. The extraction route wasn't leaked. It was sold." Voss looked past her toward the police officers. "You should be careful what you repeat in public." "Why?" Grace asked. "Because powerful men hate witnesses." Voss tilted his head. "Because dead men tell stories badly." Daniel moved so fast, one officer reached for his weapon. Grace put one hand against Daniel's chest and stopped him. "Barely." Daniel breathed hard through his nose. Voss watched them with satisfaction. He wanted rage. He wanted a mistake. He wanted one violent moment he could twist into a different story. Grace saw it. So she gave him nothing. "You were the liaison," she said. "You had the route. You had the comm schedule. You knew when the drone cover would shift." Voss's eyes flicked once. "Small. But there." Grace continued. "You didn't just let the ambush happen. You built the window for it." Voss's smile returned. "You always did have a gift for imagination." Daniel's voice came out low and broken. 6 men died. Men die in operations. You made sure they did." Voss looked at him then, and for 1 second the polished mask slipped. A colder man looked out. "A classified unit with no public record, no official footprint, and too many questions about funding," Voss said quietly. "Your team became inconvenient long before Red Canyon." Carmen, standing near the nurse's station, heard every word. Her stomach turned. Inconvenient. Again, that clean language for murder. Grace's voice stayed calm, but something underneath it burned. "So they marked us expendable." Voss met her eyes. "You were soldiers." No, Grace said. We were evidence. That shut him up? Daniel looked at her. Grace did not look back. She understood now what Mercer had risked his life to bring. The file was not only about a failed mission, it was about why the mission was designed to fail. Their unit had known too much, seen too much, followed money, weapons, and names that were never supposed to touch each other. Red Canyon had not been a battlefield error. It had been disposal. The officers around them shifted uneasily. Most did not understand the full picture, but they understood enough. Harris stepped beside Grace. Mr. Voss, he said, voice flat, I strongly recommend you stop talking. Voss laughed softly. Detective, you have no idea how far above your badge this goes. Harris nodded. Maybe. But my badge is standing here and yours isn't. For the first time, Voss looked annoyed. Then his gaze returned to Grace. You think that drive will free you, he asked. It won't. It will put targets on everyone who helped you today. His eyes slid to Carmen. Then Lily. Then Reed. Then the patients huddled behind police tape. Grace's face changed. Daniel saw it and stepped closer. Voss whispered. You can still bury this. Walk away. Let the dead stay dead. You were good at that. The lobby seemed to hold its breath. Grace looked at the broken glass. The blood on the tile. The terrified patients. Carmen standing with her chin lifted even though her hands still shook. Lily holding Mrs. Alvarez's baby while officers questioned the young mother. Doctor. Reed quietly checking the child he had shielded from gunfire. All of them had been pulled into her past. Voss wanted her to feel guilt. He was right to try. It was the one blade that still cut deep. But then Grace thought of Mercer on the operating table. She thought of the men at Red Canyon. Names no one said anymore except in nightmares. Ryan, Cole, Maddox, Singh, Alvarez, Boone. Men with families who had been handed folded flags and polished lies. Grace opened her fist. The flash drive rested in her palm. No, she said. One word. Voss's eyes narrowed. Grace raised the drive slightly. I buried myself to keep people alive. I won't bury them to protect murderers. Daniel looked at her then and something in his face broke open. Not pain. Relief. 8 years of carrying ghosts and at last one of them had spoken. Harris's partner arrived with the forensic laptop inside a sealed black case. The detective took it, set it on the admissions desk and broke the evidence tape in front of everyone. No network, Harris said. No upload. No outside access. Grace nodded. He opened the laptop. Daniel stood on one side. Grace on the other. Carmen came closer without being invited. Harris did not send her away. Grace inserted the drive. For 2 seconds nothing happened. Then folders appeared. Operation Red Canyon. Route revision logs. Satellite window orders. Payment chain. Casualty approval memo. Carmen covered her mouth. Daniel stopped breathing. Grace stared at the last folder. Casualty approval memo. There it was. The cleanest evil always wore the neatest title. Harris clicked it open. A document filled the screen. Redacted headers, timestamps, clearance codes, names, then one sentence near the center. Team designation approved as non-recoverable asset group should exposure risk exceed containment value. Daniel whispered, non-recoverable. Grace did not move. Carmen understood enough. They had not been abandoned because rescue was impossible. They had been abandoned because saving them was inconvenient. Harris scrolled. More names appeared. Not only Voss. Senior officials. Contractors. Private security executives. Accounts. Transfers. Orders routed through shell companies. Voss stopped smiling. Grace looked at him. For the first time that day, the man who had arrived under a black umbrella looked afraid. Not of prison. Of exposure. Grace leaned toward him, her voice quiet enough that only those closest heard. You should have killed me when you had the chance. Voss swallowed. Grace straightened and looked at Harris. Make 3 copies. One for federal evidence. One for your department. One goes public if anything happens to Mercer, Daniel, Carmen, Lily, Dr. Reed, or anyone in this hospital. Harris nodded slowly. That can be arranged. Grace turned back toward Voss. He was no longer smiling. Outside the rain began to ease. For the first time all day light pushed through the clouds and spilled across the broken lobby floor. The truth was out. Not all of it. Not yet. But enough. Enough to make the powerful tremble. Enough to give the dead their voices back. Enough to prove Red Canyon had never been a mistake. It had been murder. And Phantom was done letting murder wear the mask of duty. The rain finally stopped over Harborview Medical Center. Police lights still flashed across the broken glass, but the fear in the building had changed. It was no longer controlling them. Grace Miller stood beside Carmen, Daniel, Lily, and even Dr. Reed as Detective Harris secured the evidence. No one looked at Grace like a quiet little nurse anymore. They saw the truth now. She had not been cold. She had been careful. She had not been weak. She had been carrying a war no one else could see. Dr. Reed stepped toward her, his voice low. "I was wrong about you." Grace looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Then be right about the next person." That was all. No speech. No revenge. No need to humiliate him. Just a chance to change. Carmen touched Grace's arm gently. "What happens now?" Grace looked at the flash drive in Detective Harris's hand. Now the truth speaks. And for the first time in 8 years, Phantom did not disappear. She stayed. Sometimes, the quietest people in the room are carrying the heaviest battles. Never mistake silence for weakness. Never judge someone by their job title, their clothes, their accent, or the way they keep to themselves. Every person has a story you have not heard yet. And sometimes, the one you overlook is the very one who saves everyone. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below. Have you ever been underestimated, then prove people wrong? And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story may remind you of someone you know.